Pause on this.
We have an extra button to press.
We have an extra button.
And did you sneak out of the house unaccompanied with a credit card again? Because I'm reasonably sure that last week you told me that you'd bought everything and you were going to stop spending money, and yet...
Well, you see, when I have a meltdown, my partner tries to eliminate those issues, and he went and bought us headphones so that we no longer have this issue. So if you will indulge me.
Then new question. How big of a meltdown do I have to have in order for G to buy me a new car?
I said the same thing.
You don't want a new car. You want a new engine in that car.
I was like, what can I complain about this week?
You don't reward bad behaviour, G. Don't reward it. Otherwise, you feed it. In all seriousness, though, you don't expect me to actually wear those,
Shut up, Eric. Put it on.
But
I do as you're told. This has got to stop. This new hairdo.
My curls. My gorgeous, luscious locks.
I can't actually take you seriously. Guys, help me out here. We need to bully him into submission.
This is your fault.
No, it's not.
Yes, this is your fault because...
Don't blame your bad choices on me.
I recorded here last week. I left my hairbrush here because I did my hair just before the show. And then when I woke up the next morning, I did not have my hairbrush to do my hair after my shower. Hence, I had this wild thing going on. And I noticed as I went through my day, people were very nice to me.
Because they felt sorry for you.
Or they were terrified. I'm not sure if it was like the homeless vibe or what. I don't know. But they were very nice to me. And as a result, I thought, you know what, I kind of like this, and I decided to stick with it.
Please don't. Please don't. Everyone, tell him, please don't.
Wow.
This is where bullying is really appropriate.
With friends like these, who needs enemies? That's my question. Who needs enemies in their life?
Yeah, this is not good. Was that your good news, or do you actually have
you're ruining
life?
my good news right now. You're creating a flat spot in the middle of my good news.
Yeah, it's deserved.
Wow. What's your good news? Huh?
Mine's exciting.
Sorry. Am I right? Okay.
Speaking of vanity and narcissism, so I have finally pinpointed my thesis for my master's and the actual project.
Okay.
I haven't done it, but I've decided what I'm doing.
Look, doing schmooing, who cares? That's just a couple of years of your life. The deciding is the important bit.
The deciding thing, yeah. So this is the problem with academia, and this is why we spend too much money and people become lifetime academics because the research can be as varied and as vast as you want it to be. And I did that.
I thought people became lifetime academics because they couldn't survive in the private sector. Or is that just me?
Well, they get given grants. Would you go and work if people just give you money?
I've thought about trying working sometime in my life, but I just quite haven't got around to it. Look, actually, that's not true. I did actually try doing a day's work once, and I found that I was allergic. I was a landscaper's labourer for a day, and the next morning I woke up.
To the leg.
Well, I woke up. I had soreness and swelling in all my joints, and I just realized I'm allergic to work. That's the problem. So I haven't done it since.
Grifting is far easier.
I tell you what, it's a piece of cake. That's why I'm so rich.
Yes. We're going to get into that. That's actually one of our topics today.
Is it? Oh,
yes. Dear. But so my thesis now is around a kind of bred narcissism because in the digital age we are becoming enamored with our own reflections. And what I mean by this, becoming or are. So beauty standards have existed all throughout history. It's not a new concept. The Egyptians were obsessed with vanity, so were the ancient Greeks. But what I have noticed in my research and what is unraveling is that because we look at ourselves so frequently throughout the day, whether it's through Zoom, FaceTime, selfies, making TikToks or Instagram reels, people are starting to get really enamored with the digital version of themselves. Now, the problem with this, if it was just the camera, that'd be one thing. But you add lighting, color grading, augmentation filters that are changing your bone structure, changing the color of your eyes. Everything that you feed into the algorithm is what's teaching AI. So it's getting to a point where AI actually doesn't know what a human looks like because everything it learns off has been filtered through our digital manipulation.
And then in time, as more and more AI images go up on the internet, AI is going to start actually learning off AI. So right now it's learning off Photoshop and all the filters. Then it's going to start learning off its own interpretation of that in AI form.
Yeah. And it's hard because I'm a commercial photographer, right? So the very purpose of my work is to sell people stuff. Like that's what I take photos.
No, I mean, that is kind of capitalism
Correct.
101, sell things.
But, I've been in this industry as both a graphic designer, a fashion designer, and now a photographer for 20 years. I am the problem. So
I've always thought that about you, actually, that you're the problem. I'm glad you've finally come to that point.
I am the villain.
Of all of our lives.
Being the villain's way more fun.
I tell you, we do have all the fun. Have you seen the video where I go, you're the one that cast me as the bad guy? Don't blame me if I enjoy it.
Well, I think you said to me once, like, you know, people want to paint you as a villain. Don't be surprised if it turns out you're good at it. Yeah. And I was like, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be a villain.
I'm the villain. Yeah, fine. No problem. Sorry, I interrupted your thesis.
No, so that's kind of what it's about. And so I'm using the tarot archetype for anyone who knows what tarot cards are.
Not me, but okay. I mean, I know what they are, but I don't know what this archetype stuff is. But anyway.
There's two sets to the tarot. There's the major arcana and there's minor arcana. And what I essentially needed was like some framework to tell this story.
Right.
And I was like, you know, this is the problem with academia. Your research is like out here and you have to try and pinpoint it down. And I thought the tarot is really important for a couple of reasons because we've stepped away from religion and now people are using either nihilism or spirituality, witchcraft, whatever you want to call it, as their new religion. And you see this a lot, like, oh, you know, my Pisces sun and Mercury's in retrograde and all this stuff.
All the crystals and all that stuff, yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there's parts of that I'm like, could be some truth to it. You know, if the moon can affect the tides on the earth, who's to say, you know? I'm very open-minded with that stuff, but I thought the tarot would be really good because it's archetypes of the key milestones throughout one person's life. So it starts with the fool, so the juvenile, the person who has no world experience. You transition through and you learn things, you become creative, whatever, and then you go through some dark patches. You have the ego death. Your world crumbles around you. You have to rebuild yourself, become resilient, and then you end up with like enlightenment, essentially.
Sure.
And so I was like, all right, let's use that framework to tell the story of digital manipulation and beauty standards.
I don't see the connection at all, but that's why you're doing the masters and I'm not.
Correct. This has been 6 months of work and now I just have to do the work.
So after 6 months of work, you finally know what question you're asking yourself.
Correct.
Well done, I guess.
Boy, have I read some articles though. You know how everyone's like, oh, show me the science. I have read all the science, man. I have read so many wanky academic journals. It's just fluff. And this is something I thought was really interesting, right? I talk about, you know, I read the science or I stand by the science. When you go and read these academic papers, it's just full of filler and fluff. Like these people get paid for word counts. They have to fluff it out. I'm like, you can summarize it all in a paragraph or less. And you know, I've always been told, like, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it yourself.
Correct.
And, like, I've sat there and I've been reading, like, a page and I've reread that page 6-7 times. I'm like, hang on, I'm not absorbing what this says because these words don't actually there's 4,000 words on the page, but they don't actually say anything. And so what I've been doing is giving that journal article to ChatGPT and being like, hey, read this for me and summarize it. Like, give it to me in a one-pager.
So this is such a big issue. And so I'm a communicator. I don't claim to be a genius. I don't claim to have new ideas. What I can do is take the ideas that have already been articulated by others and I can articulate them better for a modern audience. Right? That's all I do. I consider myself to be an ideas retailer, not an ideas factory. But people sometimes criticize me and say, oh, well, haven't you heard of this term? There's a term for that. I'm like, of course I know the term. I'm communicating to people that don't.
Correct.
And my objective is not to impress them with how much I know. It's to have them actually comprehend something that they previously didn't. And the vocabulary is not important. There was a wonderful observation made about Benjamin Disraeli, former UK Prime Minister, and another former UK Prime Minister whose name escapes me. And the comparison was this. When you met Benjamin Disraeli, you walked away from time with him saying, wow, he's the most intelligent person in the world because he was just such an impressive human being. But there was this other person that the comparison was made with and said, when you spent time with them, you walked away going, wow, I'm the most amazing person in the world because all of their attention, all of their focus was actually on making you amazing, not on impressing you with themselves. And this is what a lot of communicators try and do is actually they're not communicating for the sake of benefiting the audience. They're communicating for the sake of impressing and making themselves look amazing.
Yeah.
And my objective is, no. I want you to walk away going, wow, I get something now. I understand something now. And so much of academia, even in the way that they write their papers, it actually really isn't about communicating what they learned. It's about impressing you with how hard it was.
Oh, it's an intellectual pissing contest, 100%.
Yeah.
And, I mean, my bachelor's, right, when I did my visual theory thesis and it was all about art, I have always been someone who's highly critical of that very subjective term, art, right? Sure, you can call it art and then you flank it with all of this like perfunctory kind of like intellectual garbage and people go, oh, profound. And I'm like, is it though? You had to use the words to make it profound. Like, you know, banana on the wall with duct tape.
Well, we've talked about this before. It's the art now is on the plaque. The art is not the artwork. Yeah. The art is what's written on that plaque.
And you read through these things and I'm like, you could have said this so much you could have taken this idea, communicated it simpler, and become far more credible because people understood what you were trying to say. Whereas if I have to read like a 25-page document and I don't actually quite understand what you're trying to say, I don't think that's intelligence. And I say this to my clients all the time when we're talking about personal brand. Don't intellectually flex to your co-workers or your colleagues.
Yeah.
You know, you need to talk to the beginner, the person who has no idea. I see this all the time with lawmakers, with people who are in the finance sector or even real estate. They use all this jargon. I'm like, hey, man, I'm a first home buyer. I've got no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Break it down.
Yeah. And it's such an important concept. But I've just noticed something that for all the money that you've spent.
You're going to pick on my coasters now. Jesus Christ.
These are our coasters? Really? Yeah. I get a little, the Lonely Planet Pocket Bali Travel Guide. I mean, Bali's nice, but it is kind of local and cheap and bogan. But you've given yourself
Abu Dhabi. I am much more respectable.
I do feel like you're trying to say something here. You know what the difference between Dubai and Abu Dhabi is?
I have a joke, but I don't think it's appropriate.
Dubai don't have the Flintstones, but Abu Dhabi do.
That button was made for you. Do you know how bad I want to go to Abu Dhabi? They have a thing called Ferrari World.
Oh, I have heard of, yes.
Yeah, I've never been to any of the Emirates states, actually. Whenever I go overseas, I usually go through Singapore. But they have Ferrari World there and like some obscene roller coaster that I feel like I need to defy death on. It
would be pretty cool. Just the scale and the ridiculousness of the things they do over there are just off the charts. Having indoor snow fields in the middle of the Middle East is kind of cool.
Explain that to me, that people like Saudi Arabia is doing a lot of that. Yeah. They're building all these infrastructure projects and yet meanwhile we can't get decent energy prices in Australia. Because, carbon emissions.
Because they're not stupid and we are led by people who are. It pretty much just comes down to that.
On that stupid thing, there's so much to get through today and I want to get through to that. But I read something today on X just before you got here and I thought we'd start with this.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
This is a question without notice. I have no idea what's coming at me.
No. This is Craig Kelly's post. So Craig Kelly is going as a Libertarian for the Senate.
Lead Senate candidate in New South Wales.
Yeah. And he posted this and he was talking about how the uni party, so Labor and Liberal, Albanese and Dutton, are basically, like we all know this, they're two sides of the same coin. But I thought Craig Kelly's post today was just so exactly what we said. Reduce the juvenile garbage, like the intellectual flexing, and just give it to me straight. And I really liked it. So he's written, rip up the budget and reply speech you've written and announce these policies below. There's not a minute to lose. The future of Australia depends on it. And this is worded to Dutton. So on energy, exit the Paris Treaty, scrap net zero, end all subsidies for renewables, start building coal-fired power station as China is, hold off building nuclear for the moment, but invest in research and develop the next generation of reactors to be rolled out post-2050, scrap blackout Bowen's carbon tax. On migration, net zero migration until infrastructure can catch up, special visa scheme for South African farmers and British citizens fleeing the destruction of their countries, free speech, referendum to enshrine freedom of speech in the Australian Constitution, equivalent to America's First Amendment, repeal the hate speech laws, age verification and digital ID, sack e-safety Karen and clean out AMCA and the e-safety commission, the globalist agenda, exit the WHO, cut all ties with the WEF and UN climate conferences, recall Kevin Rudd as Australia's ambassador to the USA and send him to Afghanistan instead.
Yeah.
COVID, establish a royal commission into COVID, make any forced medical interventions unlawful, pass my no domestic vaccine passport bill 2021, end any remaining vaccine mandates, compensate and reinstate everyone who lost their jobs because of human rights abusive mandates, clean out the TGA and APRA, sack the lot, and then restore the Great Australian Dream. Only Australian citizens can purchase residential real estate, scrap any new construction standard that increases cost, decentralise all government services to regional areas with a program of releasing land and in those areas only, available to be purchased by non-homeowners, make the universities pay to provide housing for students they import into Australia. National parks, no Australian to be denied access or entry into any national park because of their race or sex, and family-friendly taxation policies allow income splitting to reduce margin tax rates for families with 2 or more children, backdated 2 years before the birth of the second child.
There's a lot of it I like, not much I don't agree with. I would add exit the Lima agreement. That was one of the original really bad ones that specifically required us to cut our manufacturing and began the destruction of the Australia that we knew when we first were born. And going back before we were born into the 70s, Australia had a very healthy manufacturing sector, very competitive manufacturing sector globally, and it was the Lima agreement that began our trend away from that. On the immigration stuff, I have a different view. But actually, there's an interesting opportunity here for the libertarians because no one else has quite taken this up. We have obviously a lot of immigrants in this country who have arrived relatively recently. We've had a huge influx over the last couple of years. Officially, they were making up for the lack of immigration during COVID. But the result is we've just had 1 million people in 2 years or whatever it is, some stupendous number. There's a real opportunity here to actually turn around and say, okay, we are cutting welfare. And not just for immigrants, we're cutting welfare dramatically. And we need to do that. Our survival depends on it. I posted today about the NDIS. Originally, it was going to cost $1 billion over 4 years. Now we're spending $52 billion per year, which is more than we spend on defence. Our welfare is going to destroy us. And not just the NDIS, but across the board. So welfare needs to get slashed. If we slash welfare, a lot of immigrants are going to sit there and go, oh, but that's the reason I came here. Mm-hmm. Because unfortunately, that is the reason why many, by no means all, but many of them did come. So the opportunity for the libertarians, I think, is to say, okay, we will repatriate any recent arrival that wants to go back to their home country. We will pay your airfare. You will never get a visa back to Australia. That's the deal. But we will help you go home. And we can immediately, voluntarily, I think we would remove hundreds of thousands, if not potentially, there could be as many as 1 million people who, if they weren't getting the free money, the free healthcare, all the stuff that, let's be honest, some of them came over for, they brought their multiple wives so that they could each get family benefits and so on and so forth. There's a real lifestyle opportunity here for certain cultures. If we remove that, they would rather go home. They would rather go back to where they came from voluntarily. We don't have to deport anybody. We don't have to kick anybody out. And it would make a lot of sense for the taxpayer to fund that on the proviso that they can't come back. That's it. You've had your time in Australia. Hope you had fun. Go back and don't return. We fund that, and then instantly a lot of these problems around housing affordability, housing availability, and the lack of infrastructure not keeping up with immigration can catch up relatively quickly. What I like about it as a policy is that it's entirely voluntary. Turning around and saying, oh, net zero migration, okay, that means we've shut the door. Any families that had moved here in good faith, looking forward to a family reunification type policy, etc., is now kind of being screwed, where people have made decisions based on the current policy settings and we're now kind of screwing them. And I'm not a big fan of that. But I think we need to do something. Clearly, politically, we have to do something, but we have to figure out what can we do that isn't then betraying our own values and betraying our own stance on human rights.
I like what you said there, where we reinstate our values. And I think Australians in general, and I mean collectively Australians, have really forgotten what we value.
Yep.
I think now we are so focused on the US and what's happening there, and that's why you've seen that big political split.
Yeah.
And those are essential values that we all sort of rallied around no longer exist.
Well, it's worse than we don't value them anymore. We've been told that that's what's wrong with us.
Yeah.
Our values are what's wrong with us. The things that made Australia what it was in the 70s and 80s are now the things that we're supposed to look on with shame. And our history is being rewritten to facilitate that shame. I'll give you one example. When the Indigenous Australians were included in the census, originally, I used to know exactly what year that was, but I don't remember. There was a referendum that then allowed them to be counted in the census. That is celebrated today as this moment where, this terrible, horrible, racist policy that didn't even see Indigenous Australians as humans was finally ended. Actually, that's not how it was seen at the time at all. There was a very, very big movement within amongst Indigenous Australians to reject that referendum because under British law, they were exempt from British law. It's not that they weren't treated like humans. They weren't treated like subjects of the crown. And many of them recognised that they were better off that way. And actually, in many respects, they had more rights and they were treated better. Certainly lots of things were done very, very wrong. But they were actually allowed to all the stuff that we're supposedly trying to give them now, here, have your land, have your culture, have your all of that existed prior to that referendum. That referendum was an effort to kind of solve some of the issues that they were having at the time and essentially normalise relations and not have a two nation type setup going on. That's now exactly where we're headed back to, is a two nation setup. And so our history is being rewritten, and the motivation for why things were done, the stolen generation, etc. The very fact that Australia was fortunate enough to be colonised by the British and not by the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Germans is a wonderful, wonderful thing for us. But we're being taught to hate that. We're being taught that, Captain Cook was evil, etc. So what values do we have that are worth defending if we don't even have history that we can be proud of?
We were seeing that across the globe, though, and it's like a rewriting of history. And there was a post that got put up on X last week, and it was a young British African who was screaming into the camera not just, when I say screaming, I mean that because it's important, pounding his chest. My ancestors built this country.
Yeah. All this nonsense.
It is nonsense.
Yeah, the Vikings were black. Oh,
these people are being indoctrinated to believe it, and with the passion and the way that he expressed himself, you can tell he believes that to be true. And that's what these academics are doing. That's what these universities are doing. That's what these schools are doing.
So what's really interesting is it's charting a similar path to feminism, and I'm going to upset some people here.
Oh no, I'm the biggest anti-feminist.
No, not you. I mean people here. So original feminism, first wave feminism was about women are people too. Women have rights. We should be allowed to stand up in a court of law and give a testimony, and that testimony should be given equal weighting. We should be allowed to own companies, own real estate. We should have rights in a divorce. We shouldn't be able to be treated like property in a divorce. Okay, fine. Second wave feminism was women should have opportunities too. We shouldn't be being held down and not allowed to work jobs and have careers and be in certain professions and so forth. We should be allowed to compete with men. Third wave feminism was we should get equal outcomes to men. And what that was about was shifting from we want to rise to the same level as where men are to now we're going to drag men down. Because unfortunately, in some areas, women can't compete. There are biological differences, and those are real. And so now, instead of saying we want to lift women up and remove artificial barriers that are keeping them down, we've now started saying, well, we're going to drag men down so that we get equality of outcome. And what happens as a result, and we are seeing this now, is the fourth wave feminism, the young uns coming up now, the ones that have really gone nuts with this whole thing, is men can't have anything, right? We're watching this now with this new adolescence TV thing that came out.
I watched it.
Have you got that list on the list of things to talk about today?
Look, I didn't think it was as woke as everyone's saying.
It's not so much about whether it's woke. What I'm watching is people leveraging it as an opportunity to continue the demonization of young men.
I definitely saw that, but I didn't go into that thinking anything about politics or anything about the conversation. I went into it just someone had told me about the cinematography.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was talking to another photographer about it, and they were saying it's all one continuous frame. It's really interesting. That's all I knew. I didn't know about the conversation, and I watched it, and I definitely heard them mention Andrew Tate.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely saw that this kid had an incel culture and stuff. What annoyed me about it is it assumed that we knew what they were talking about. We don't know what you're talking about. Explain it more. I felt like that was very poor character development, and it all centered around whether or not he did it. And you knew it instantly because they showed the footage that he did it, right? Sorry if I ruined it for you guys. But what really annoyed me with that, I felt like it was really superficial. If you're going to do something and talk about incel culture or, toxic masculinity, put the facts on the table. And even if it was incredibly biased towards feminism, fine, do it. Make that movie. Then we've got something to talk about. Sure,
absolutely.
But clandestinely sort of dilly-dallying around it, that bothers me.
Well, they thought they were being subtle, but they're not really capable of subtlety.
Well, it comes back to communication, which is what we just talked about. I felt like it was really ineffectively communicated.
But to bring it back to the reason why I bring it up, this issue of what they're actually trying to do now, and not so much with adolescence itself, but with the leveraging, the weaponizing of adolescence, is to continue this idea that there's no such thing as non-toxic masculinity. So we had this idea there was feminine, there was masculine. Then we had this idea, well, there's also toxic masculine. These are the people that have really gone off the rails. They're the ones that are either abusing people or what have you. And now what they're doing is actually taking away the idea of non-toxic masculinity. Anything that has a masculine element to it is automatically toxic. And so their feminism has moved into this phase of saying you can't have anything.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
And to come back to bring it all the way back to this guy in the UK, beating his chest and saying, my ancestors built this country. We've moved away from the idea of, well, black people used to be held as slaves by white people, and the reverse used to be true as well, but that we didn't do that. So we need to address the fact that, we held black people as slaves. Okay. We need to make sure there aren't artificial barriers holding them down. We need to make sure they have equality of opportunity and that they can succeed if they have the merit to do so. But now we've moved past that point and we've moved into the stage where there are people in the racist movement who think that it's their right to take everything away from white people.
Correct.
You have no history. You can't have a culture. You don't have a history. You're not allowed to have values. All you have is shame.
And they're doing that with South Africa. But I wanted to bring up, have you watched The Full Adolescence or are you halfway through it? The character I thought who was most interesting was the father.
Okay.
Where are you up to?
I've literally watched only some of the shorts, and there was a guy who was doing he was praising it and saying how wonderful it was, and I tried to watch that because I thought I want to hear his side, and I just couldn't stomach it. So I know relatively little. What I know more about is the circus going on around it rather than it itself.
I haven't actually looked at a lot of the online conversations, but I did watch the whole series, and I thought the dad's character was way more interesting. So the father talks about how he was beaten by his own father, right? Like most of our parents were, corporal punishment, berated, and essentially the father talks about how it's, today we would call that domestic violence. And he says, a key line, I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but he says, if my father raised me, and the father is quite, as in the dad on the show is quite well mannered, he has moments of rage, but he identifies it immediately. And I assume they're trying to show that that's how a good man should behave.
Right.
And he makes the comment, if my father raised me, but then I raised my son who's the murderer, what does that say about me? And what I thought was really important with that line is there is a conversation that we're avoiding, and I wish they went into this because I thought this was really important. Our parents' generation were raised with discipline and respect, and it was done out of fear. I'm not saying that's necessarily right. Kids were smacked, kids were disciplined, kids were made to respect their parents. Now we have the opposite. They've got helicopter mums, cotton wool generation, right? Anything that the child wants, they get.
The kids run the families.
The kids run the families. And I have seen this, like, when out and about. Like, I remember when I was younger, if I, threw a tantrum, like when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old, mum would be like, all right, well, leave then. You can stay there. You can grab the shits. Now I see that in the supermarket. The child's like throwing things on the floor and the mum's acting like it's not even happening. I'm like, hey, whoa. I know you're trying to do your whole parent-child thing here, but what about my experience in the supermarket? I don't want to see this. And I thought that line was so important because it's like if his father created him a much more respectable, arguably disciplined, hardworking man, but then that person with his softness because he refused to be like his father creates a murderer, what is that saying?
Yeah.
That's the conversation.
And this is where I get really concerned that men are having everything taken off them. We're not allowed, there is no form of masculinity that is considered to be positive. We no longer recognize the need for the masculine. There is the feminine and there is the bad. Those are your options now.
Well, can we talk about toxic femininity?
Sure.
Toxic feminism? Is that the...
Well, yeah, toxic femininity.
Femininity?
Femininity.
I struggle with all these words, man.
Yep. Blah, words.
So, I put up a story last night.
Just do the podcast in interpretive dance.
I can't.
Yeah.
We might get more views. I should wear lower cut tops and be like this.
No comment.
So I put up a story yesterday because I was talking about how I'd been in a bit of a creative slump and I was explaining, what happened. And then there was a story that I think I briefly touched on it on this podcast, but I didn't want to give it oxygen because when you give these people oxygen, it has more ammunition and it just sort of makes it happen again.
All publicity is good publicity. So
last year, G and I sort of put him a little bit on my Instagram, but I've never showed his face just because he's a very quiet person. He doesn't want to be on social media.
Sure.
He doesn't have social media himself. So cool, no worries. Happy to do that. But, I might show like a photo of us holding hands or whatever. Someone... So I've told you about Tattle Life, the forum.
Yeah.
So Tattle Life is this insidious forum where it's just women and maybe handful of gay guys. and they just write the most vile, disgusting thing about people on the internet. And everyone has their own forum, right? Like influence A, influencer B, whoever, right? It doesn't matter who you are, you've probably got a forum. And what they do is they obsessively stalk your social media. They'll screen grab everything and then just dissect it and come up with these fantasies around it. But, you know, gossip I don't care about because gossip has always existed. That's fine. What I care about is the next step, which is there was one or two, because it was two different sets of handwriting. Two of them have collaborated to come together to go and buy a card, write a horrible note on it, buy baby pacifiers, some condoms, and put it in the post and send it to my partner's work. Now, I've never shared my partner's work. I've never shared my partner's name. They have found that out. And I get it. You can be cluey and good on you, like great investigative journalism. They've figured out where I live. They've figured out where my partner lives and his name. And they've sent this package to essentially say that I'm trying to trap him with a baby. And it's disgusting. Like it's really gross. This is stalker behaviour. That's the kind of shit that only women do to women. Men don't do that to men.
Women are so much worse to women than men ever will be.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
And the reason I talk about this, like there is definitely a conversation around domestic violence and men treating women poorly. That sure, great, totally agree. But if we can't have the same conversation around these so-called feminists and the vile hatred they spew and the encouragement they give these other women who are shitting on other women. Like women don't just try and hurt each other with words. They fight to the death. They want to rip out your jugular. They want to see you completely hung, drawn and quartered, and they enjoy it. That's what scares me about it. And so I put that story up on my Instagram and I was like, I don't want to give it oxygen because I've just validated it in their mind. It bothered her. Let's do it again, right? You can't win with this.
No.
That's what women are like. And feminism has emboldened them to behave this way.
Plus our legal system and the cultural, the Me Too movement, the believe all women, this idea that we should just reflexively assume that any time a woman speaks, and this is a continuation of what I was just saying. It used to be that a woman's word didn't hold as much value as a man's in court, and that's wrong. They should be equal. But now what's happening is they're not just happy with bringing it to being equal. They're now saying a man's word should have no value in the court of public opinion.
Yeah.
If a woman says one thing and a man contradicts her, well, obviously we have to assume the woman is right.
Well, we saw that with the Me Too movement with Johnny Depp, and Candace Owens is now going back through the Harvey Weinstein thing. And I think we talked about that. If you have framed Harvey because you just wanted to see him in prison, that's wrong for so many reasons because it means there's loopholes and an actual predator might actually get out because you jailed him for inaccurate information.
Yeah.
And that's why you need the justice system to do its job.
Yeah.
You can't fabricate evidence. But we're seeing that now with a lot of things. So do you know who Brian Johnson is? The guy who's trying to age backwards?
Oh, yeah.
He gets a lot of airtime.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about him. I mean, I've seen bits and pieces on socials. But anyway, as always, when a man starts to do well, it happened to Huberman, and I'm sure it's going to happen to Jordan Peterson soon. I'm sorry, Jordan, if it does, but he'll be accused of some kind of like sexual assault.
Oh, that'd be something horrible, yeah.
But Brian Johnson, his ex-partner has come out essentially saying that he abandoned her during her cancer diagnosis and treatment. And she's made, of course, an Instagram reel about it and selectively edited this reel and it's gone mega viral. And now everyone's thinking he's this horrible, because I think he's a billionaire or he's very wealthy. And essentially this ex-partner of his, they were together for 3 years, has claimed that, you know, he didn't help her and he abandoned her. And anyway, Brian Johnson has since replied and he's taken all of those videos that she selectively clipped together and played the full video. And be like, hang on, here's where she's in hospital by herself. I'm taking the video.
Yeah,
here's the raw photo.
Filming. Yeah.
Here's me in 2020 when she said that I had dumped her. I'm there ringing the bell to celebrate the fact that she'd recovered from cancer. She said I wasn't here for this. That's me holding her hand in the video. And this bothers me because it's extortion. She was trying to get money out of him, $9 million. There are horrible men out there. There are men who do heinous things to women. Agree. Jeffrey Dahmer, or not Jeffrey Dahmer, what's his name? Ted Bundy, sorry.
Yep.
There's people like that. Yep. Sure. Egregious, should be held to the full extent of the law. There's that, what's her name? Rosie Beattie's husband who murdered her son, right? We've got plenty of examples. But there are women who try and trap men for monetary gains or just out of spite. I've told the story of my friend who was accused of rape. Those women need to be held to their tails to the fire, just like the men do, because in between there are real victims who become like collateral damage because the law always will change because of the extremes, right?
And if you want to address things like this adolescence thing of incel culture and young men being pushed to the fringes of society. You know why they're flocking to the fringes of society? Because they've been made to feel unwelcome within the mainstream.
Yep.
So we need to actually give them a place, and that means that their voices have to be heard. They actually have to have some kind of ability to have a place in society. When you've got a situation where 1/3 of all of all partner violence murders, one third of the victims are men. 2/3 are women. Now, there's a lot of focus on the 2/3. Obviously, it's 2/3 of the problem, right? Okay, so that's completely fine. But think about how much less likely it is for a woman to successfully kill a man versus a man to successfully kill a woman. So if you have 1/3 of all partner deaths being men, we would have to assume that there's an awful lot of assaults happening on men that are non-fatal in order to end up with 1/3 of the fatalities being men. In addition, who do you think is a greater danger to their children, fathers or mothers? Mothers by a long shot. Yeah. It's not even close. And yet we hardly hear about that. We only hear, and if we do hear about it, it's in the context of we need more mental health support for mothers, not mothers are evil for toxic feminism.
I can speak to that myself. My mum was absolutely the villain in my life. My mother treated me like utter shit, and she was the most violent in my household. My mum would have blind fits of rage where she'd grab my hair by my ponytail and just drag me around the house, screaming expletives. She would smash me in the face with her hand.
Wow.
And then 2 minutes later be nice as pie. And people wonder why I don't talk about my family. Like, my mother was a monster, but she's bipolar. And apparently, I mean, I've heard this on the grapevine, so secondhand information, but I've been told that she was diagnosed with bipolar, which would make a lot of sense. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but you know, I don't really get caught up in labels. I just remember what she did. She burned my hands with boiling water. Like, that was my own mother.
Yeah,
and then in the very same breath, when she couldn't wait to brag to someone about my accolades or my academic achievements, but then behind closed doors was abusing me, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And so what we've got is a situation where men often experience this. So a lot of young men grow up being abused by their own mothers or the devouring mother archetype. There's a reason why Jordan Peterson talks about it so much. Yeah. It's a huge problem. But they grow up into a world where they're being told that they're always the problem, especially if they're white. If you're male and white, you are responsible for absolutely everything that's wrong in the world, and there is no place for you in mainstream culture, which is why they're flocking to the fringes. That's why Andrew Tate is as appealing as he is to these people.
This is why I get so frustrated with generalizations as well, because you're basically summarising that this entire collective group of people are inherently bad, and that's not the case. You know, and we're seeing the same here. And I've argued this before when we talk about African migrants. It's not an African problem, right? Like, stop talking about generalizations.
There are specific individuals that need to be dealt with properly and harshly, and the rest of them need to be left alone.
Yeah, and back on the whole feminist thing, I want to talk about this. I know you're going to roll your eyes, so I'm trying to be very serious. I need to talk about Bonnie Blue for a second and OnlyFans culture, because
I thought
I'm going to slide it in every podcast.
Can I just quote Martin Luther King for a second? I have a dream
that I don't bring it up.
That one day we will get through an entire podcast without mentioning OnlyFans.
I can't, because it's so important. Because fourth wave feminism has emboldened women to now literally lean into those archaic archetypes about the whore, right? But now feminism is literally arguing that sex work is real work and that selling your money for profit is some kind of female empowerment movement.
Not selling your money for profit, by the way. Selling sex for profit.
That's what body, sorry. Yeah.
But what's fascinating to me is actually fourth wave feminism is the complete victory of misogyny. Look at what fourth wave feminism idolizes for women and says, women, you should be this. You should give away free sex. No strings attached. Don't become their baby mama. Get rid of the baby. You can have no responsibilities whatsoever, and it will never come back to bite you.
Yeah.
Guess what misogynistic men would like women to believe?
Correct.
That they can have no strings attached sex with them anytime they want and live that kind of a lifestyle. Fourth wave feminism is the end of the full circle.
I agree, and I think you're going to see women reject it, particularly the next generation coming up.
Oh, they already are.
And just on this whole OnlyFans thing, I understand it from a commercial perspective. The more outrageous it is, the more money they generate. I get all that. But I went on to Bonnie Blue's X, because on X you can actually post pornographic videos and not get punished for it.
Is she the one who's just recently announced her engagement?
No, they're all doing it. So there's 3 of them. There's one in Australia called Annie Knight. She's just announced her engagement.
Is that her? Okay, yeah. Right.
And she's engaged to a cricket broadcaster's son.
Which is like, that's the weirdest credential. Like, what is Brayshaw? I think it was.
Brayshaw, yeah.
Like, how is that relevant? Like, you're the son of a person who we might have heard of before.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's just to show, like, oh, this is the level of caliber of guy that has. That she's managed to. I think it's just a psyop. I don't think it's real.
I think the caliber of guy is exposed by the fact that he said yes to being engaged to her. I think that's what exposes the caliber of guy.
And now Bonnie Blue's apparently got a guy, and Lily Phillips lied that she was pregnant, all this sort of stuff. And it's that whole what do you call it? Like the boy who cried wolf. They're getting more and more outrageous with their claims. And then one day one of them's going to turn around and go, hey, something terrible's just happened to me. I was raped and tortured. And everyone will be like, oh, God, here we go again. When you push those extremes so far and you dance on the fringe, you are inevitably going to encounter trouble. It's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
But Bonnie Blue, right? And I wish I didn't look, but curiosity got the better of me. I looked at her ex. And she posts all the clips from her videos. And there was like clips of her during that sleeping with 1,000 men.
Right.
And you watch, like, I don't think this is safe to put on a podcast. So I'm going to try and dance around it. And I don't encourage you guys to look either because you're just emboldening her. But there was a particular video and it involves urination. And this guy is having his way with her whilst urinating and it's been swapped over and whatever. And I'm like, this is a 25-year-old woman who's just bought herself a Ferrari and is arguably a millionaire off this. What extremes are left apart from defecation and like then bestiality? Where then? You're 25. You've already pushed the boundaries to the extreme kink. And I'm not kink shaming. I'm just saying like, where do you go next? Because you're already at that polarity.
Well, I mean, my brain kind of goes, how long before someone with mental health issues is being encouraged to become a snuff victim?
Yeah.
You know? And to do it voluntarily for the views. I won't be around to see it, but they'll
But that's
be
what I'm saying. Like
for that. Like
there is like some really dark people out there, and like the dark web's full of all sorts of insidious stuff. And there's someone like Bonnie Blue, who the reason I'm invested in this is she's mainstream now. This isn't dark subcultures on the dark web.
Yeah. It's
this
not in the dark corners of the internet.
We're seeing this on the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
And you can go and literally look at her stuff on X. It's not behind a paywall.
But I kind of look at that and go, is it mainstream culture or is this actually the logical conclusion of the mainstream media becoming clickbait, becoming click chasers? People like this. I don't think a senior editor of the Wall Street Journal 80 years ago would have ever even considered giving 2 column inches on the 66th page to Bonnie Blue. But now the Daily Mail's chasing clicks.
Yeah. Oh, and I think there's so many different elements that play into this. But young women see Bonnie Blue buying a Ferrari and buying her designer bags and go, well,
that
I
must
want
be
that.
it. Yeah.
And if I just have to show my boobs, how bad is that? How bad can it be? There's a whole, speaking of Abu Dhabi, there's a whole subculture, I forget the word, it starts with K, of I've got to be so careful. I don't want to get us banned off YouTube.
Trigger the censorship.
There's a practice by men in those Arab countries where they use women as pigs. And it's through defecation and basically raping and doing all sorts of insidious, awful things, and the women get paid for it.
Right.
It is a subculture. It's the same as yachting. Do you know anything about what I'm talking about?
You are using words. I mean, I'm familiar with the word yachting. It's just an
not what you
enjoyable
think.
day out on the water under a nice sheet of canvas.
These young women who are very attractive get lured with money and yacht culture, prestigious culture, luxury living.
Yeah.
Their trade-off is they become a plaything.
Right.
And get completely debased, essentially. Abused. Yeah. And there was a story that literally came out a couple of days ago about a Ukrainian model who did that, and then she was raped and tortured and discarded in a gutter. And the reason I bring this up, God, this got dark, didn't it? Bonnie Blue.
I blame you for that.
I am dark. It's a storm up here, to quote Elon Musk. And, what's the other one? Lily Phillips and all these girls. They are a result of fourth wave feminism. There is no way this would have ever happened prior. And it scares me.
Well, the nice thing is now, and we mentioned this before, I think the culture now is splitting. The younger generations now are very much splitting. There are the people that are doing what you're saying. They're seeing Lily Phillips, they're seeing the Ferrari, they're seeing the faux glamour, the Instagram side of what they do, and saying, wow, I want that. That looks amazing. But there is a rapidly rising proportion who are looking at that going, that is everything that I do not want my life to be.
Yeah.
Now, those people are really interesting to me because they're also looking at their parents and saying, well, I don't want what you've got. I don't want what you've got either. They're looking at their grandparents and going, that's not as bad, but it's still not great. And this is where we're seeing young people and we're seeing teenagers flocking back to very traditional church denominations, the ones that are still doing the same thing they've been doing for hundreds of years. They're actually, they're going and getting a trade younger. They're getting married younger. They're planning to have more kids. There is this incredible rejection of all of that going on. And they're rejecting it because it finally reached its logical conclusion. And they're looking at it going, really?
Yeah.
That's the end of the road here. That's the destination. We talked about progress and progressives. Well, you have to have a destination. That's it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be there.
Yeah. Well, I think with progressives, they just keep moving the yardstick. There is no...
But like you say, there's a point where you go, well, where do you go from here?
Yeah. And like that's the problem with extremes. You want to dance on those fringes, like you inevitably will fall off the cliff. But on that, like we talk about the decay of culture, we're seeing things like the migrant who peed in the elevator. Did you see that story?
I saw that, yeah.
And like these are small isolated incidences, but I think what it does is shed light on a much bigger problem where there's like incompatibilities with a lot of these cultures.
Can I push back on that?
You can.
I filmed in King's Cross back when they brought in there was the King hit issue where a couple of young guys were killed with King hits in a relatively small geographic area of King's Cross up in Sydney in the span of a couple of years. This is going back to probably 2016 or 17, I think, when I did these videos. So I flew to King's Cross. I did a video about it, about the fact that they were introducing this, what it was at 2 a.m. or midnight curfew when these King hits were actually happening at about 9:30 p.m. This wasn't an issue of them raging on for too late into the night. But you just go to King's Cross and so the minute you step off the main road, all you can smell is urine. And it was such a striking thing as soon as
ammonia,
and just it wasn't the migrants. Let me tell you that. It wasn't the migrants who were peeing in the alleyways, all right? So, okay, a migrant has peed in an elevator. Yeah, that's gross. No, that's not the sort of thing I want to see happening. Because it's caught on camera and it's a migrant, it makes news. But there are non-migrants peeing in all kinds of places they're not supposed to every single night. So it's just one of those things I find it really difficult to get too outraged about.
I don't get outraged about the migrant. I get outraged about the decay in culture because that's just a symptom of what's actually happening here. That's happening because I'm going to play devil's advocate. This migrant was working for Uber Eats, was probably desperately trying to like get his money, and the more he delivers stuff,
and they get tracked on time, and like the amount of pressure they're under is enormous.
Yeah, and so it's no different to like a taxi driver peeing in a bottle or a pilot peeing in a bottle. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not condoning it. What I say is that's a symptom of the world that we're living in now, that you don't feel like you have 5 minutes to just find a bathroom, right? And I still think what happened is disgusting, but I don't think it's like fuck these guys, I'm just going to pee in the elevator.
I mean, honestly, an elevator and not outside somewhere, like, come on, man. Like that side of it, sure. But I do just find myself going, sorry, but we've got that in our culture too.
The other thing I thought was interesting, this went viral as well, it's sort of trending on X today. There was a Jamaican woman on a bus being screamed at by an Arab man who was doing Ramadan. So he's fasting and she's eating her lunch.
Right.
And the interesting thing about this is it's two minorities battling it out, and this is making the cultural zeitgeist. And the Jamaican woman's like, I don't care if you're fasting. I'm eating my lunch. It's none of your business.
Yeah.
And the Arab guy was saying like, it's Ramadan. You can't eat in front of me. And she's like,
bad luck.
This is a public place.
Get off the bus.
And I thought, that clip's really important because what it's pushing into people's faces is like the level of intolerance by some people and the expectation of us to be tolerant. It's not equal. And this is a conversation. Like I'm all for freedom of religion, freedom of expression, so long as it's not thrust on me. And when you see things like that pop up, you go, this is a conversation that we will be having inevitably.
So this is a conversation that's actually well underway. It's been going on for decades. It's this issue, the paradox of tolerating the intolerant. And if you tolerate intolerance, then eventually your tolerance will be replaced by the intolerance. And so therefore, the only way to maintain your tolerance is to be intolerant. It's this paradox. So what I think is really important with this debate is to be very precise, to be very surgical about what it is that we must not tolerate. And so for example, right now, this exact argument is happening in the US. People are saying, well, we can't tolerate right-wing extremism and Nazis, by which, of course, they just mean ordinary Americans who voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so the minute you say your opinion is intolerant, so we won't tolerate you because if we tolerate you, then that'll lead to intolerance later on. No. An opinion is not intolerance. Screaming at somebody for eating their lunch is intolerance.
Yeah.
If you are saying, I want to live my life the way that I believe I should, and someone won't let you live your life the way that you believe you should, well, they are being intolerant of you. But if you're screaming at someone saying you can't live your life the way that you want to because it doesn't suit me, well, now you're the one who's the problem. And we need to be quite sort of precise about that in these debates because the paradox is real.
Yeah.
If we just tolerate absolutely everything, then intolerance will win in the end.
Yes.
But we need to be really careful that we don't become the thing that we're trying to stop.
I just find it really interesting because, I told you about Pluto and Aquarius, right? We've talked about this. There are so many really big cultural discussions that are being thrust in our faces, and I think people out of fear of political correctness are dancing around them, but I don't think you can anymore. I think in 2025 it's time to really face these ideological issues because there's some serious things that
people are dancing around them. It's time to take off the ballet slippers and put on some kickboxing shoes.
Yeah,
let's go.
I agree. Shall we go into some more home soil stuff?
Well, look, do you have anything that's a little bit less depressing?
Sorry, guys, this one got dark. It's important to talk about. Do I sound far more intelligent when I come in like this?
This is the thing. Is it that the topics were dark, or is it just that our voices are so much deeper and more rich and sounding that suddenly everything just has that extra sense of gravitas?
I feel like I just want to read like a Jane Austen like this.
Well, I was thinking Lord of the Rings, but I always think Lord of the Rings, so that's just predictable on my part. That was also predictable on your part.
I love this thing. It's like...
Oh, no.
Sorry.
It's going to be a long day. So
Okay.
the podcast will go from being 2.5 hours to being like 4 hours, and the extra hour and a half is just pure sound effects.
I'm trying to like use them when they're appropriate. But I've got to talk about good old Mon from Kooyong.
Oh, Mon from Kooyong.
Good old Mon. Put your masks on.
Oh, can I just say, there are all these people out there saying that the Teals have no standards. They're so wrong. The Teals don't just have standards, they have double. Mm-hmm. They have double the standards that anybody else has.
I love someone who platforms themselves on integrity and honesty in politics whilst their husband is running around stealing campaigns.
And they're taking money from a billionaire who buys a jet.
I just cannot laugh enough from this.
So I'm actually watching with great glee because you cast your mind back only 1-2 election cycles. The Teals were the future. They were the next wave. They were going to destroy the Liberal Party because they were for people who were economically conservative but concerned about the environment. They were doing what the Liberals wouldn't. Mm-hmm. That was the narrative around these people. And of course, they were quite successful.
I love how they're independents, but they're all the same.
I know. They're funded by the same people. They work under the same branding, but they're not a party because if they were a party, that would require a whole bunch more legislation that they have to comply with and scrutiny that they have to pass. So these people were the future, and yet already, 2 election cycles later, we're talking about the Liberals basically taking back most of the Teal seats that they lost, and the Teals cannot catch a break right now. Everywhere they turn, they are running into another own goal. They are just kicking themselves in the head.
But this is what happens when you're disingenuous. Like, you can't maintain that facade for too long.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is the problem with so much of the progressive left ideology. You are performing. You don't actually believe any of this stuff. You can't be virtuous enough, which means that you exhaust yourself.
Well, there was something really familiar about the Teals. I was like, what is going on here? And I was thinking about the colour teal. How it's in between blue and green. Blue, of course, being Liberal Party, green being the Greens Party. So hence they picked the colour teals to make that statement, hey, we're in between these two camps. And I went, well, But you don't actually really have anything in common with the Liberal Party. You've got a lot more in common with the Labor Party and the Greens. You're in between those two. Well, what colour would that be? And I realised instead of wearing teal shirts, they should be wearing brown shirts. And then all of a sudden it clicked. It just made perfect sense.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep.
And the hypocrisy of them all, I mean, I've talked about Zoe Daniel before. She's the member for Goldstein, which is my electorate. She's known for blocking people, and there's a Facebook group dedicated to people blocked by Zoe Daniels. But I think I talked about this episodes before, where her campaigners are basically silver-haired boomers, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they're riding around on bikes during the middle of the day campaigning when we're all at work.
Yeah.
And I did a post on this on X a couple of days ago, and I was talking about how Mon for Kooyong's posted this like campaign photo, and it's mostly silver-haired boomers, right? That's who these people are. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with boomers, but these people are retired. They've got nest eggs. They've got super. They grew up in a totally different world. The world's changed.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and suggest, no, just ask politely. Their demographic makeup in terms of, I don't know, the colour of their skin, would they happen to be overwhelmingly white?
Yes.
I'm so surprised.
Actually,
so surprised.
There is not a person of colour in Mon for Kooyong's picture.
It would be racist of you to point that out, so don't. Obviously, if it was a Liberal Party picture, that would be headlines.
We'd get the microscope out.
The microscope. But obviously, because it's Teals, we're not allowed to do that. So we have to be colourblind.
It's just, I think they think people are dumb. And it's not that people were dumb, they just weren't switched on.
I don't think that they think people are dumb. I think they don't realise how dumb they are. And that's not a throwaway insult. There is a level of lack of intellect, lack of perception that people can get to where they no longer have the perception to perceive that they lack perception.
I'd go as far as saying the more educated you are, the less informed you are. And you get all these
in many respects, yes,
letters after your name. Like it says me who's doing my master's, but she's Dr. Monique Ryan, and she insists on being called doctor. Is she an actual medical doctor or is she a PhD?
Well, see, here's the thing. I'm not sure, but I've been reflecting on this because you do like to one-up me with the fact that you're doing your master's, and no doubt you will go on to become a doctorate and all the rest of it. I was just thinking about
Not unless someone pays for it.
Well, people spend 6 years getting a PhD, and I was just thinking about it going, man, PhD, 3 letters, 6 years, it's 2 years per letter, right? That is so inefficient because it only took me about 18 months to get my PTSD, which if you do the math, like obviously I'm a genius. Okay, it's just, I like my jokes better when they don't come with sound effects, okay?
You make a good point. The thing about that sort of getting your doctorate or doing any postgraduate stuff is it's meant to facilitate deeper thinking about something that you're particularly interested in. And when you're doing your bachelor, right, you just sort of dancing around topic. It's quite superficial. You need to go on and then immerse yourself. And the only reason you have or incentive to do that is because perhaps there's like a topic that you're like, okay, this is going to be my life's work.
Yep.
And that's exactly how I approached my master's.
Yep.
Like beauty standards, understanding digital manipulation. That is literally what I do. It's what I talk about. This makes sense. Using it to grandstand and saying, well, I have a doctorate. I have done this. I would say you also have $45,000 worth of debt.
Yeah. But also it becomes a carrying card, but there's an axiom, there's a truism. Once a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be useful as a measure. Once a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be useful as a measure. So, for example, GDP in the economy, right? The GDP is a way of measuring economic activity, but then the government sets a target for what the GDP should be, or we're going to grow the GDP. Well, now they start manipulating the number in order to make it grow, and now it's no longer useful as a metric anymore. Yeah. So the same thing, a PhD is meant to be a metric. It's meant to show a certain level of expertise, but because it comes with prestige, it immediately becomes a target, an objective for people to aspire to. And so now people that don't genuinely have that expertise are finding ways to game the system and get that, and it becomes worthless.
And I think it should be a lot harder to qualify. I think, I thought it was a lot harder to get into postgrad than it was, but, the universities want the money.
I actually have a little quiet ambition that I've not told anybody, so don't you dare spread this around. If this gets out from between the two of us, I'll know that it was you that told people. I really hope to be granted an honorary PhD before I die.
Yes.
Based on my life's work and writings around civil disobedience and political discourse and political philosophy and all that stuff. Purely for the purpose of watching people who have long pilloried me for being homeschooled and uneducated and stupid and all the rest of it, try and come to terms with the fact that little old me writing books in everyday plain English specifically for the purpose of not impressing people but actually educating them ends up with a PhD that I didn't have to lift a freaking finger for because it was off the quality of the work that I did in the real world without ever entering academia.
Yeah.
But look, that's I've got 40 years or so before that needs to happen.
I think I said this to you, or maybe I've discussed this before, but the whole thing with academia is I've had a lot of people saying, Carly, why would you be going back to uni? You know the unis are progressive and they're co-opted and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, no, that's the exact reason we should be in it. Because that's the issue. The balance is off because it's sort of it's indoctrinating people as they come into it, but also it's only spitting out that which it wants. So if you go in there and it's uncomfortable. There's moments where I'm in lectures and I'm just like, thanks. But I'm always respectful. I don't deliberately try to antagonize people.
Yeah.
But I sit there and I listen and whatever, and I'm like, you know what? I think I've said this before. I want to be undeniable. I'm not just going to be like, oh, well, she said all the right things and there's all the land acknowledgements and all the dancing around all the isms. No, she was just really good. Like she's a bit of a shit, but hey, it works good. And it's interesting because I was reading through in your masters, you do an exegesis, right? Which that's your written part.
Yeah.
I don't even know what exegesis means, but that's what it is. And talk about wankery. And I was reading reading other students that had gone before me, and in the first 3-4 pages, there's all of these like stuff that doesn't seem to be consistent across them. Land acknowledgements, discussions around PTSD or their mental health issues or declarations about their sexuality. And that was from like the 2020 ones. I go back to like the 2014s and there's none of that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how much of this is just performative so that the very first thing your lecturer or supervisor reads when they're opening up your exegesis is to go,
one of us.
You're one of us.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what
pass.
It is. So can I get a little bit nerdy and in the weeds for a moment?
Do it.
I would like to talk about the very exciting, very sexy topic of marginal utility. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, marginal utility is really important, especially when it comes to things like university degrees. So understand this concept. If you have no doctors at all in your city, the first doctor has an enormous amount of value. The first doctor to graduate from university, you as a culture will happily spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, invest whatever is necessary. We need a doctor. There are lives at stake. Then if your city is large enough, you might need 10 doctors, you might need 100, you might need 1,000 doctors. But there comes a point where the utility of that 1,001th doctor is not nearly as great as the utility of the first doctor.
Yes.
And so this is what's referred to as the marginal utility. It's the usefulness of one more. If we add one more to the total that we've already got, is it useful? And universities are built on this idea that education is valuable. Mm-hmm. And it is. If you don't have any engineers, educating an engineer is extremely valuable. But if all you have are engineers, you need a plumber and a builder and a concreter. That's actually more valuable.
Yeah.
So the marginal utility, if you have 99% doctors in your society, the marginal utility of a new doctor is zero. There are no more people left without medical care. Everyone's got a doctor. Everyone is a doctor. And actually now the marginal utility becomes negative because it's a misallocation of resources. The time and money spent educating that person to be a doctor to then be useless in society when there are so many other things that we need so many more of. Now, let me bring that back to the university side of things. We are way over the point of saturation for most of the things. What's the saturation point for liberal arts degrees? I would say it's pretty low.
Yeah.
And we have an enormous number of these people.
Yeah.
This is why people are graduating with these pieces of paper and going to flip burgers.
There's a comment that gets passed around campuses that just fills me with rage, and it's called P's get degrees, meaning passes. Yep. And a pass is like a 51%.
Yeah, it's an invitation to mediocrity.
And it infuriates me. Mm-hmm. When I was doing my bachelor's, my girlfriend and I were competitive with each other in a healthy way. and we were getting HDs across the board. But if you're getting HDs across the board, then you start going, well, I got 92%. I got 93%. And like it was a healthy competition. And we were so far ahead of the rest of the people in our class that it became kind of boring. I want to be challenged. And as you've seen from like the way I treat the podcast, like I need to be good.
Yeah.
I don't like sucking at something.
We off camera had a little conversation about the fact that you need to publish. This is a publish or perish game. And sometimes in order to publish the volume necessary to succeed in this game, you do have to compromise a little bit on the quality. I've learned that over 16 hard years. This little lady here is still trying to be like elite level quality. And I'm like, just dial it back a little bit, Carly. Just a little bit.
I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist, but I am someone that like through my own frustration, I have to become not expert, but like good at something.
It's a good trait to have, but it's a trait that you need to be able to switch on and off within the context. If you're working on a feature film,
if you know where that switch is, just
if you're working on a feature film, be a perfectionist.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got the budget, you've got the time, and the end result is expected to be perfect.
Yeah.
If you're working on a podcast that no one's paying you any money for. We don't have any advertisers, by the way.
We are negative.
If you would like to advertise on the Oddcast or just maybe sponsor some new equipment for us, get in touch.
Just on that, I know we talked about this really quickly, but I don't think people realise, because I saw your post the other day about doing like a subscription or
I'm thinking about starting a membership or a Patreon,
So, yes, we made the decision to do a podcast and it's all volunteer based, but you know, for it to be taken seriously and for it to do well, there is a level of expectation that your production quality is good, right? And being that this is somewhat my industry, I'm not a sound engineer, I'm not a videographer, so these aren't my wheelhouse, but it's in my industry. I was like, well, I have to make it look good.
We have lights.
We do have lights. That's the only thing I had. And we've slowly, G's gone out and bought us microphones and headphones.
You've gone above and beyond.
Yeah. But I don't think people realise this is like almost 15 grand worth of gear in this room to do this podcast. Yeah. And I haven't made $1. And it's not about making $1. It's more so like I'm so passionate about it. I'm willing to invest that money, my partner's money, to get it to a point where we can get, you guys to watch us. Yeah. And then it goes, well, not only that, I spend like 24 hours the night before just going through everything and preparing the show notes, and then we do the editing and then the thumbnails.
Which you unsurprisingly handed back to me after attempting for a few weeks.
It's a lot of work, and I don't mind doing the work. I enjoy doing the work, but my point is
time consuming.
It does get to a point where like, okay, this is taking up arguably like 20, 30 hours of employable time. So yeah, you do need to get paid for it. It's not about getting rich. It's about, hey guys, like this is where my work hours are being spent. Like, whether it's through advertising, selling merch, monetizing YouTube, whatever it is. Like I hate that this discussion around grifting. Yeah. Because grifting would imply that you're doing nothing and getting money for free.
Grifting is a very specific concept. Grifting is getting something either for nothing and not providing any value in return, or in particular, it's about whipping up a fear, a scare that doesn't really exist, and then making money off that. Grifting is what the pharmaceutical companies did during COVID.
Yeah, okay.
Grifting is what Al Gore has done from climate change for decades. That's grifting.
Yeah.
Providing entertainment and perspective that people enjoy is literally, that's media. That's been the business of media ever since someone figured out how to tell a story.
Yeah,
we are in the media. But can I also make a comment that the someone in response to that, I posted up on all my socials just saying, hey, I'm considering whether I need to start like a $6 a month subscription. Would you sign up, and what would you want? Because this is the reason why I haven't done that sort of thing, is because I'm trying to influence people. I don't want to put my content behind a paywall for just the in crowd. That's not the point of what I do, of why I do it. I'm trying to influence people, and that means reaching the people that don't know that I exist with some video or something that just happens to cross their feed. So for me, putting things behind a paywall is not really the answer. So I was asking, what would you want in return? Would you, if you were to sign up? And someone jumped in and said, try to avoid making it about the money, blah, blah, blah.
I did see that comment, yeah.
And my reply to them was, well, can you just talk to my landlord in my local supermarket and ask them to not make it about the money? Because if they didn't make it about the money, I wouldn't have to either.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the simple reality. I'm simply testing and asking the question, do you see enough value in what I do to help me continue to do it? If not, that's completely fine. It's a question. The answer is not presumed. I just want to know: is this something that I should? Is this a direction I should go in or not?
I always say when it comes to viability of a product, right? The market will sort you out.
Correct.
And this is what everyone does. You innovate and then you iterate, right?
Yep.
And if you make the first version of that product and put it out there and it bombs, well, then the product sucked. If you put a product out there and a few people get around it but not enough, then it's not good enough.
Yep.
And then the third or the fourth or the fifth iteration, you hit that sweet spot and then you get market viability. So if you're putting out something that's valuable, your audience already denotes that it's valuable because you have an audience.
Yeah.
To make it better and to reach more people, you need to iterate, and that requires investment and refining the product. And then you're able to get past the echo chamber and start to get more people, right?
Yeah. So I already know that what I do is valuable because people are choosing to spend their time on it.
Yeah.
And that's a really significant thing because they could choose to spend their time on so many different things.
Well, this is what people underestimate. Time is actually more valuable than money.
Yes.
That's the one thing that rich people have that poor people don't is time.
Well, and they have time, ironically, because they have money. They can pay other people to do other things.
Time is more valuable, yeah.
But probably more pertinent to this conversation is that money is actually a language. It's a way of discussing our needs, our wants, our priorities, and what we actually would like more of in our life. And so when you offer a product, people lie with their words all the time. People can even lie with their time. If you come and see my play, it's going to be amazing. Oh, I don't really want to. It's going to suck. But you know what? Yeah, okay, sure. So people will lie with their words. Oh, that was amazing. I loved it. It was so good. They'll lie with their time sometimes. They do not lie with their money. People do not lie with money. It's the conversation where people are the least likely to be lying and the most likely to be telling you the truth.
Yeah.
So when you do something and people respond positively financially, they are telling you honestly that they see value in what you've done.
The conversation though around people monetizing their new media, whether it's podcast or YouTube or whatever it is, right? I tell this story all the time. Australians love an underdog until that dog's doing better than them, and then it's pull them down. So when you're championing that person's voice, Topher, your marbles video is amazing. This needs to be in front of everyone. It's okay, this is how I'm going to get it in front of everyone. Oh, you're a sellout. You've monetized it.
That's right.
Now you're changing. It's but this was the same goal. And Alex Hormozi, do you know who Alex Hormozi is? Yeah. He talks about this all the time. The first thing you'll lose is your close mates because once you're doing better than them, they'll become judgmental of what you're doing. So it's a isolating game trying to achieve entrepreneurial success. And I remember this when my first business went into liquidation. Everyone's like, ha, you failed, all that sort of stuff. And it's okay, well, what did you do? You build a business up?
Yeah.
And then
that's the man in the arena thing.
100%. Yeah. And it's you have to get to a point where, if you're going to put all your time and energy into something, whether it's this or whatever it is, there has to be a financial return on it because your time needs to be able to fund your life.
Yeah. Living isn't free. We're all consuming all the time, whether we like it or not. People say, I don't want to live in a consumerist society. Oh, really? You're going to stop eating?
Yeah.
You're going to stop wearing clothes and walking on carpet and floorboards because every time you move, you wear something out a little bit more. So inherently we are consuming all the time. The question is, are we creating more than we consume? And how do we measure that? How would we even know? And the answer to that is with money, because when someone pays you money for the thing that you've done, they're telling you that they place a certain value on it. And it's a way of being able to say, well, if I can do something for someone else and they value it so much that they pay me enough for me to then pay everybody that I need to pay to cover all of my consumption, then what this conversation is telling me is that I've created more value than I consumed.
Do you know what makes me laugh is obviously I read the comments and things like that, and we've had quite a few people offer to come and help us with the editing or the sound engineer. And what they're asking for is a job. But it's okay, cool. So you guys are telling us that we need to upgrade equipment. Yep. We need to build a team and all that. But you don't want us to make money off it. Who's funding it?
Yeah. And what I also love is these people that think that the big podcasts are just like two people in a room.
Oh, my God.
Every now and again, the big channels will do a behind the scenes. Stop and look. Yeah. Actually really pay attention. There was one Russell Brand did was about 11 or 12 people.
Yeah.
And this is in that room where he does his little meditations. And everyone thinks it's just him with the camera. No. It's like 11 or 12 people. What he said in that meditation had probably been on the drawing board for a week or so. They're working on multiple episodes at a time and developing them and workshopping them up to the point where they film them.
Well, remember when we went to Stephen Bartlett's?
Yes.
What was it? She was the social. No, what was her job title?
So that was the two. They have the same name. The two Graces. So there was the head of failure.
Yes.
And there was someone else who was in sort of the marketing, essentially.
Yeah. So for those of you guys who weren't there, so these two Graces.
Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO. Yeah.
One of the big podcasters in the brosphere, as they
over
100
people on staff, if my memory serves me correctly.
Yes.
Don't quote me, but it's a lot of people.
For the podcast.
Yeah.
And they think it's just as simple as Stephen invites one of his mates, they sit down, they talk, and that's it. They have a team that focus on what thumbnail for each video.
Yep.
And they do an A and B test of 10 different images. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what A and B means, is it's the same thing with one variant. And it could be the photo or it could be the title or the text.
The colour of the text.
And so it's like
the
they're
size
just
of the
marginal
font.
differences.
Yep.
And so they do 10 of those tests. So that's 20 different thumbnails that gets tested on YouTube to decide which one's the right one for that only video. And then that one long form podcast gets cut up into 10 to 15 pieces of content.
Yep.
And they do the same thing, 20 tests of thumbnails for all those shorts.
They have a team of people whose job is to background potential guests before the potential guest even knows that they're a potential guest.
Yes. And they're shortlisting, they're doing background research. And the one thing I got from Stephen, so we went to the two Graces like little side.
It's like a masterclass in the afternoon.
We did their masterclass and then we went to the show. And
the show was underwhelming in my opinion.
I didn't like Stephen live.
Yeah.
And I also didn't like Chris Williamson live.
Yeah, no.
Saw them both.
They're all trying to, they're lining up and Diary of a CEO guy especially is lining up to try and be the Anthony Robbins successor. Stephen Bartlett is literally working with Anthony Robbins. I think that's where he wants to go, but he just doesn't have it. At least not yet. He probably needs another 10.
Young.
Well, he needs another 10 years in the oven
Yeah.
to get to the point where he's actually got that skill set.
I find it really hard to be life coached by someone who is so much younger than me.
And why is it always the teeny boppers who want to be life coaches?
Yeah. I'm like guys, go through some proper hardships and then tell me your wisdom. You know?
Anyway, sorry, I sidetracked you from where you were.
But what I found really interesting about that is I've been in media and advertising my whole career. That's exactly what I do. And I think I told you, like when I was in publishing, I would see how much effort goes into one of those adverts for the back page of the Sunday magazine that used to go in the Herald Sun.
Yep.
And at its peak of circulation, that could get $36,000 for one ad for 1 week on the Sunday mag. And that was when circulation was at its peak. And then we started to digitize. And the amount of effort that went into that, because there was so much money being exchanged so they could have the team.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing this now with the agency model, and I'm seeing it in what I do. Traditionally, subcontractors like me worked for an agency. That agency had the retainer with the big client, and then we would be called in to do the work and so on and so forth. That money doesn't exist anymore because there's been that breakdown of traditional media, and what you're seeing is a lot of independence. But it needs to come back to a point where, okay, if you want all these independents to do thoroughly researched content, have really well articulated podcasts, good production quality, and also have people be able to have staff and people get paid, because everyone talks about, you need to pay your staff. It's like, yes.
Yes, we do.
But do you know what you need to pay staff?
Bananas? But peanuts.
Peanuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need money, guys. And the other thing is too, in Australia, and this brings us on to another topic, the amount of stuff that is required to have an employee is extraordinary.
No.
Pay as you go, super, work cover. They get, 12 sick days, 4 weeks annual leave, and how many mental health days?
You're not implying that perhaps human industrial relations law and human resources law is over the top in Australia, are you?
Just a little bit.
You're not suggesting that these people don't deserve all of it.
Well, can I tell you a story?
Sure.
So I've told you about my partner's employee.
Oh, yes.
We talked about this last week. And again, dancing around. But this employee, I don't want to throw this person on the bus, but I think their stories
Bus.
important.
Bus.
Okay. So, and just for that, just to give you guys a bit of insight, when I'm talking about someone, the reason I don't name and shame them is it's not about the person. I'm not being like, hey, let's attack this person. I'm pointing out an element that needs to be discussed in a broader issue. Yeah. And, you use the anecdotes. Anyway, this person who works for my partner, he only came on board a few months ago and sold him the deal. Was like, I'm hungry, I'm ambitious, I can't wait, I'm keen as a bean, right? Yeah. This is whatever a boss wants to hear. Yep. Oh, great. Yep. I'll work Saturdays. Now, they got offered a base salary. This person came on board with base knowledge of the industry and requires further training to become really finessed in all the small bits. In the specialty, right? They didn't have that. And that's fine. You can be taught that. But what you can't be taught is discipline, reliability, and, effort and all that.
What I would say is actually just self-respect.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, this person sold the deal and was hired based on that and offered to work on weekends. Now, in those 4 or 5 months, how many weekends do you reckon this person worked?
4 or 5 months. So there's potentially, let's say there's 20 available weekends. I'm going to say they worked 62.
They worked 0.
Oh, I'm so surprised.
They were so hungry and so ambitious.
They were literally hungry by the end of it.
That they were given incentive to come in on the weekend to do that extra bit of shift, and they did none, not one. But they were so hungry and so ambitious.
Sorry, let me just try and put the pieces, because there's a lot of moving parts here. That's bad?
Somewhat, yeah.
Ah, good. Thank you. Sorry, I was confused.
So with this, and the reason this bothers is people want more and more entitlements. So this person in those short few months has exhausted all annual leave, has exhausted all sick days, has taken mental health days, leaves work early because the child's sick, doesn't make that time up, leaves right on 5 o'clock because the clock's done.
5 o'clock.
Has quit, right, and has to serve the 2 weeks notice, calls in sick with gastro.
Would you really want, if you were the employer, would you really want them to actually show up and do that work though? Or the tools will just go missing, if that's the kind of person they are.
But it's just indicative of kind of the employee has the upper hand. They have all the entitlements.
Yeah.
And this is what really got me about the whole work from home and 4-day work week.
Yeah.
Right? You're giving all these employees benefits, but there's no increased productivity, which means there's no increased profitability.
Yes.
Which means the business actually does poorer.
Yeah.
Which means the business has to reduce overheads, likely result in smaller workforce.
Or, and this is the one I love, in order to recoup the same overheads from lower productivity, they have to raise prices, which means that person who thought that they were scoring because they're working from home and they're not really working all that hard goes down to the supermarket and goes, well, my money doesn't go as far. It's like, well, yeah, of course it doesn't go as far because these business owners have to recoup their costs from less productivity.
Yeah.
Your prices are going up. Of course they are.
Which brings me, with standard us, we're never on topic, but this brings me to something that Gerald Rennick was talking about.
Jared Rennick, yeah.
So
Queensland Senator.
Yeah, so where is it? I put it on here. So he highlighted that there is a $335 billion, with a B, public servant retirement liability in the Australian budget that no one's talking about.
So specifically not in the Australian budget. This is what's referred to economically as unfunded liabilities.
Yes.
These are promises that we're making that we are not putting money aside for. And yes, public pensions are a big one in the US and Australia.
So for those who don't know what we're talking about, essentially the Australian government has offered public servants long service and retirement funds based on whatever level they're at in perpetuity until the day they die.
I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think there's been some reforms. So, for example, politicians now don't get a pension after they retire out of politics. They used to, but then there was a cutoff date. I think it was in the early 2010s. They passed legislation, said, right, any new politicians after this point in time won't get that. And I think there's been some similar reforms, but there is a massive unfunded liability where the promise has been made and the taxpayer is on the hook for, Jared knows his stuff. So if that's his number, then I'd believe him.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go deeply into this, but I think it's it speaks about the burden that's on the workforce, the taxpayer, to fund these people for limited productivity.
Well,
sorry.
by that point, no productivity. We're funding them for them to retire. And this is the problem with what's known as off-budget spending. So we have the budget, and that's the official numbers, and that's what we're pushing, I think, close to $1 trillion in national debt now in the budget.
Which is obscene.
Then you have off-budget spending, which is things like NDIS, things like NBN. They find excuses. So sorry, not NDIS, I misspoke. Things like Snowy 2.0, things like NBN. These are typically things that they claim, they pretend are going to be profitable.
Yeah.
So they say, well, we're not going to count this as national debt against the taxpayer. This is debt that's going to get paid off by the profitability of this as a business. But these are businesses, and I put up air quotes, being run by politicians. So they're never going to turn a profit. These people, if they knew how to turn a profit, they wouldn't be in politics. They'd be out there in business being successful. So inevitably they end up on the taxpayer hook, or the taxpayer ends up on the hook. And so once you actually factor that debt in, our national debt climbs even higher. Then you've got out as another layer beyond that, you've got these unfunded liabilities. These are the promises that are being made. Altogether, Australia is on the hook for something akin to $2 trillion.
Which, when you think about it, like the only people paying that back is the middle class. We will cease to exist in years to come because there's only so much tax you can take. Who's paying it?
It could go a couple of different ways. I'm enjoying having a debate with I think it's Mark Burris online. He says that we're on the road to Zimbabwe. I say we're on the road to Venezuela. We'll meet in 20 years and compare notes, and we'll probably find out that we were both right.
Yeah. And this is the extraordinary thing that really worries me about the general Australian is because they're so politically apathetic. We're so far down the road now that it's on the verge of catastrophic, and we're not going to be having this conversation until another 5-10 years where people are going, what happened?
Yeah, it's a concern. So I have told you the story, but I don't think I've said it on this podcast before. So I'll tell the story of.
Before you do that, we are going to lose battery.
Are we?
Yeah, this one.
Oh. Yeah. Naughty camera.
Yes. So give us 2 seconds.
Hold that thought.
And I'll be back with this short break. Hang on, wait.
So, I in the edit, I added in a 2 minutes later thing from SpongeBob. I got flagged for copyright on YouTube.
Everyone uses that.
I know.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. 1 moment.
Well,
back after this short break.
Well, my thought was held successfully, and I will download it again. So Venezuela. So I was there in 2015. I was there with my wife for a friend's wedding. We were there in Caracas City for a week when it was the most dangerous city on earth outside of a war zone. You had to go to Afghanistan or Iraq to find somewhere more dangerous. And it was quite striking because there's a lot of similarities between Caracas City and Melbourne, and that's no coincidence. Both cities have a very wealthy history, thanks in the case of Caracas to the rubber boom, in Melbourne to the gold rush. But similar kind of results, beautiful, beautiful architecture from 100 years ago. Beautiful ornate buildings, multi-story, lovely boulevards down the centre of the city, etc. The difference is that in Caracas, there's an enormous amount of decay, whereas it's been maintained much better in Melbourne. And if you look up, you could think you were in Melbourne, then you look down and there's bread lines, literal lines of people stretching around the corners of multiple blocks of people waiting and hoping to get into a supermarket today in the hope that the supermarket might have a little bit of the essentials that they need. We were there for a wedding. They had to start buying and storing butter months in advance so that they would have butter to make the wedding cake.
Yeah, wow.
And and these were wealthy. This was a wealthy family, right? They were the ones with money. You can appreciate the ones without. We're in terrible, terrible strife. I saw people on their way home from work, these are people with jobs, wearing suit and tie, dumpster diving in the hope of finding scraps of food to take home to their kids. I went to a pro-government rally. So this was shortly after the death of Hugo Chavez. They now had Nicolas Maduro as their president. Now, Chavez came to power, I think, very late 90s, early 2000s, only about 15, 20 years before we were there. And he's the one that brought in socialismo. He's the one that promised this socialist paradise. And so in 15 to 20 years, they'd gone from being relatively wealthy to being among the poorest countries on earth. And only back in the 1940s, they were one of the wealthiest countries on earth. They still to this day have the highest per capita proven oil reserves of any country on earth. They have a beautiful growing climate. Their tourism should be off the charts. Let's not forget that's the Caribbean Sea right there in front of them. They have so much going for them, and yet they are this impoverished country. I went to this pro-Maduro rally in the very center, this beautiful city square in the very center of Caracas with all the old buildings around it, the old government buildings, beautiful Spanish-style government buildings. And I'm watching people lining up to be given a free T-shirt, which of course has all these pro-government slogans all over it. And I was there with someone who spoke the local language, and they interpreted for me, and I spoke to these people. And they expressed to me how incredibly grateful they were that the government was giving them a free T-shirt, because if it weren't for the government, they couldn't afford to buy one.
Yeah, wow.
And the level of, and they meant it. Like they couldn't see the cause and effect relationship. Well, if it weren't for the government, you'd be able to afford to buy one for yourself, right? So then it's a very divided city though, because there's the government areas, and then there's the essentially the business areas, and that really is the divide in the city. There were a lot of people that tried to stop Hugo Chavez from getting into power. They tried to stop him from being elected. He rigged the elections. He may have won the popular vote as well, even without the rigging, but certainly there was rigging going on, and he got in. And so, because of the heritage, you can go and listen to incredible music. You can, the cocktails are in fish bowls, and there's like $1.70, and it's like you're drunk on one.
Yeah,
we still had 5. Here's the thing. That's a $30 cocktail in Australia. So I'm saving $25 every time I buy one. So if I buy enough of them, we'll make money on the trip.
Yeah.
Right, we'll turn a profit. So look, I went hard. I tried so hard, I'm sitting there in this incredible jazz bar, drinking these massive cocktails and enjoying the atmosphere and the food. The food culture is incredible for those that have the money, where they know how to get the black market ingredients. And I got chatting to an older gentleman who was sitting in the next booth over from me, and he spoke enough English that we could talk, and he was probably 60 or so. And he very quickly figured out that I was someone he could talk to. I wasn't a pro-Chavez person, and he began to share with me his experience, because he had been one of the people who campaigned for the then government that lost power to Chavez, campaigned against socialism, campaigned against Chavez, warned his compatriots, his country, against the dangers of socialism, gave everything to this political campaign and lost. And he shared with me, and he had this pain in his eyes and on his face, the experience of watching a bunch of other people move out of Venezuela. They moved to Spain, they moved to America, they moved to Mexico, they moved to other parts of South America. And he was angry at them. Why are you abandoning this fight? You need to stay here and fight with me. And he gave everything to the fight, but ultimately the fight was hopeless.
Yeah.
Because whilst he was trying to plug the holes in the bottom of the ship, there were other people there with sledgehammers making them bigger, right? And he realized too late that he'd waited too long and he had nothing left, and he couldn't get himself or his family out. So then he shared with me what it was like to watch his son become chronically depressed as he lost his business and has no real prospects in life, because you either join the government side or you live in poverty.
Yeah.
And either way, you're living in poverty.
Yeah.
And then he had the experience of watching his grandson, who was still a young child at that point in time, develop the symptoms of malnutrition, the potbelly that comes with malnutrition. And he said, I can buy alcohol. We're in this lovely little jazz bar. He said, I can buy alcohol. Do you think I can get him fruit?
No.
Do you think I can get him, just food? He's dumpster diving for his grandson to try and stave off malnutrition.
Yeah.
And I know what a man's face looks like when he's lived that, and he has that on his conscience, because he blames himself.
Yeah.
My friends told me to get out, and I told them they were wrong, and actually they were right.
Yeah.
And so I made a promise to myself in that jazz bar in the basement of a building in Caracas that I will never be that man. I will never be that guy who gives everything to the fight and keeps nothing back for the family.
Yeah.
Right? So people said to me, why are you leaving Victoria? You should stay and fight. No, I shouldn't. My first loyalty is to my family.
Yeah.
Now, I'm still in Australia. We considered leaving Australia. We decided to stay. But is there a point at which I would leave Australia? Yeah, there is. I'll never stop fighting for it. Yeah. But I don't have to be here and suffer the stupidity of the fools around me who are bashing more holes in the bottom of the ship.
G and I have had that conversation. We've actually been having that conversation a lot. Like, what does that look like for us? And when do you think we pull the pin? And we've sort of been just putting a plan together. And it's really confronting to think that. I haven't been to Venezuela, but I've been to Cuba. And, you know, I've told the story of Cuba plenty of times, but I see that and I just think this place would have been so beautiful in its heyday.
So Cuba is another 30 years down the path, and that has an interesting dynamic because they're post-collapse.
Yeah.
They're into the equilibrium.
There's photos on my website, if anyone wants to see them, or I'll post them again on Instagram.
Yeah.
And it's like these beautiful colonial buildings and Spanish buildings that have just fallen to dilapidation.
Mm-hmm.
And beside someone's house are building ruins.
Yeah.
And same thing, it's poverty. And people romanticize the vintage cars. They go, oh, isn't that amazing? No, these aren't those cars, guys. These are parts. These are zombie versions of those cars. They're doing what they can. It'll be like a 1960s Cadillac with a Kia steering wheel.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's easy to look at it from a romantic lens at one side, but then you look a bit closer and you see the decay.
Yeah.
And it's actually like I was meant to be in Cuba for 14 days and I left after 7. I found it really hard. The curfews, the non-flushing toilets after 9 p.m. Like there's all these things. Back then it didn't have
power
internet.
being switched off regularly.
Yeah, power switched off regularly.
Caracas water was being switched off regularly.
Yeah. And it was, I say this openly, like it was the hardest country I've ever been to because it was so, what's the word? I've been to poorer countries, but Cuba was so confronting.
Well, you can see that wealth used to be there.
Yeah.
That's what I found confronting about Caracas. I've been to Port Moresby.
Yeah.
You walk around, there's never been money there.
Yeah.
You go to Caracas, there was money there.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like it's the same with like some of the places I've been in the Middle East. But what I found so haunting was that people had accepted that status quo was that's it. And I think it was what am I trying to say? Like the loss of hope was evident, I guess.
Yeah. Very much so. So can I jump in again?
Yeah.
What I'm not saying is that there's no hope for Australia. I'm certainly not saying that. And you look at a place like Argentina as a contrast to Venezuela and you say, well, look at how the absolute transformation in their circumstance in the space of a year. El Salvador being another great example. But it has to come from the people. It has to come from the political will at the grassroots level. And the unfortunate reality of the Australian people is that we have had it so good for so long that we think that can't happen to us.
Well, I told the story of Purple Pingers with the communist logo in on his social media, like that's accepted to be perfectly good, and people are championing socialism. That we have a Marxist conference in Melbourne. All these things, and I just sit here and I get frustrated at times. I just sit here and I have to turn socials off because I just get so like, how are we living through this? And I said this to G the other day. I was like, unfortunately, Australia is going to have to learn the hard way. We are going to have to circle the drain before we figure it out. So
the reason why, though, Argentina did then elect Javier Milei, Javier Milei is an economist. He has spent the last 20-odd years educating people on economics.
Yeah.
And, he built a bit of a kind of a rock star image around himself. There's a bit more to it than that. There's a certain degree of cult of personality. That's fine.
It's the sideburns.
But fundamentally, he helped people to understand. And it took 20 years to help enough people to understand to then be able to generate the popular demand for change. And we're going to have to go through a similar process here. Not that I want to be the Javier Milei, but my mission is to try and help more people to understand. And I can only I might reach a few hundred new people a day. That might be all I can do. And in a country of 25 million people, you go, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
But add that up over 10 years, over 15 years, over 20 years, that has the potential to become a movement.
Yeah.
That then finally the right person comes along. And this time for them, there is the popular appetite for change.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have been there if people hadn't just quietly chipped away at that for the 20 years. So whether I stay in Australia or whether I go, my plan is to stay in Australia. I have no plans to leave, but it's an option that remains on the table. But irrespective, I will keep fighting for Australia. But I said to my niece years ago, a couple of years ago now, it was as we were coming out of all the COVID nonsense, my brother and his family are very aware of what's going on in the world. And my niece was, I think, about 13 at the time. And she said to me, where should I be thinking about living in, when I'm an adult, when I'm leaving home, when I'm, et cetera? And I said, well, the blunt answer is almost certainly not Australia and quite likely not an English-speaking country.
Yeah.
Now, that was pre-Trump 2.0. That was post-Trump 1.0. But things are looking much better for the US, and I think through the US, things are going to end up looking a lot better for the rest of the Anglosphere as well. So maybe we've dodged that bullet. But certainly a few years ago, I would have been thinking certain parts of Eastern Europe, maybe certain parts of Central America, listening to Andrew Henderson, the nomad capitalist, thinking about places where the government just doesn't have the budget to hassle you that much.
Yeah.
Go to some of the services are worse, but that's because the government doesn't have money.
Yeah.
And you know what else comes with that? Freedom.
Yeah.
The government can't hassle you.
Yeah. Gina and I have been having these discussions, and, for a little while I thought it was like move to the US. But then part of me was like, well, I don't know, like it depends what happens post-Trump. It actually really depends what happens in the midterms, I think. But there was a YouTube video that came up from Diary of a CEO, and it was called, it went up 6 days ago, Emergency Debate. And it's an economist and an Australian businessman who now lives in Britain. I'm just going to probably start playing if I look at this. I just want to get their names. And I've never been angrier listening to a podcast. So it's Gary Stevenson and Daniel Priestley. Do you know those two people?
Daniel Priestley's a name I've heard of.
Yeah. He's a successful businessman. They're both, all three of them, Stephen Bartlett included, multi-millionaires, very well off. And this Gary guy, this is the first time I'd been exposed to him, but he's an economist, and he's made his fortune betting on the destruction of the Anglosphere.
Right.
And he's a multimillionaire.
That would have been a profitable enterprise for the last 20 years, sure.
And he's made his money, and he's sitting there going, I'm advocating for the person. And what they're doing is, between him and Daniel Priestley, they're debating on what do we need? Is it tax on wealth or tax on profit? And Gary is saying that we need a tax on wealth. And anyway, they go and watch it. It was infuriating but really enlightening, because the people who are making the decisions for people like you and me are people who have no skin in the game.
Yeah.
These multimillionaires, they'll be fine regardless. But what you're seeing now is this Daniel Priestley was arguing that everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. We just need to open the doors up for entrepreneurship. And I'm like, that's not the case. Nurses, doctors,
there's plenty of people
teachers.
that don't. But I think there's a third way, to coin a phrase. People argue about, well, who should get to make these decisions, and should we do this or that? Well, actually, there's an entirely different approach. Why are we allowing people to make most of these decisions in the first place? Let's just let people act. Let's just let people do.
Yeah.
And whoever does well will learn from that and set an example, and whoever does badly will learn from that and also set an example of a different nature. We don't need people making decisions about every aspect of our lives, and so a lot of politics boils down to who gets to make the decision.
Yeah.
A lot of my argument is, why does someone get to make that decision for the rest of us? Why don't we get to make that decision for ourselves? So I find a lot of those sorts of debates quite frustrating to watch, simply because I'm like, you're pretending like these are the two choices, but actually they're both bad. And there's an entirely different approach available to us if we are willing to take it. And that's what Javier Milei has done. Slash government, slash regulation, let people make their own decisions. Yes, some people are going to hurt themselves, and they're going to set an example for the rest of us to learn from.
Yeah.
That's how life works. That's better than having an idiot make a decision for all of us and hurt everyone.
Yeah. And that whole, lowering the standards to appease the lowest common denominator makes no sense. We've talked about this plenty of times.
Just remove all the warning labels and let the laws of physics sort it out.
And as I said before, the market will always sort things out. If it's a good idea, it will do well. And through that innovation, you'll be able to iterate and refine it and make your money. And I'm very pro-capitalist. I'm very pro-entrepreneur, but I do also recognize that that's not in everyone. And that's another thing that annoys me, particularly about social media, and it ties into everything we've talked about so far, is that, again, people think that's the only way now. Well, it's not the only way. Not everyone wants that life, because it's really hard.
Yeah, not everyone wants it, but entrepreneurs create the opportunity for others who want just that job, the employee type of mindset, which is completely fine. But if we can go back to oh goodness, I've lost it. There was a thread there. We were just talking about entrepreneurship.
Economists, the politicians making the decisions.
Goodness, it'll come back to me in a second. There was an important thread there, but I've lost it.
Well, it can't be that important.
Oi.
But let's segue over to the federal budget, because obviously that's a big one.
Yes.
And what I've been seeing is a whole bunch of finance influencers coming out championing the budget. And the one that really boils my blood, and I'm sure it boils yours too, is the wiping of 20% of the HECS debt. And I say that as someone who's going to have a sizable HECS debt, sorry.
This is very regressive. So in economic terms, progressive is used to mean something that causes wealthier people to pay more. Regressive means that poorer people pay more. When you take a university degree, now the argument for university degrees is that it's worth the investment because you earn more later.
Yes.
So someone who's gone to university, the advertising says, will end up wealthier than someone who is not.
Yeah.
So now when we take working class people, tradies, etc., and we make them subsidize the university education of someone who later on in their life is going to earn a whole lot more money, we're literally making poor people pay to help make wealthier people wealthier.
Yeah.
This is a deeply regressive form of taxation. But what boils my blood with it is the complete dishonesty of the language. To say that we're making it free or we're forgiving 20% of their debt, or the Labor Party are going to, that really annoyed me when Anthony Albanese put up a post saying the Labor Party were doing this. Labor Party ain't doing crap. Mm-hmm. Taxpayers are doing all the heavy lifting, and that's going onto the credit card that my children are going to have to pick up.
Can we just unpack this? Like, let's not talk economic terms. Let's just literally lay it out on the table because I cannot stress this enough. When Anthony Albanese says he's taking 20% off student debt, that money doesn't disappear. Mm-hmm. It just gets put across to tax somewhere else. People seem to believe that when the government says we're wiping 20%, they're forgiving that debt.
Yep.
Nope. They are going, hey, we're going to tell you that this debt over here is disappearing. And over here, where you're not paying attention, you'll be making up not only that 20% we cut, we'll put interest on it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that'll just end up on the national debt, which is bonds being sold out into the bond market, which comes with interest. So we're going to be, as a country, we're going to be paying that off for decades. This kind of dishonest language is what really gets my goat. And that comes back to a question you asked me when I was on the train on my way here that you haven't followed through on.
I totally forgot about it.
Yeah.
What is the superpower you would choose if you could choose one, and how would you use it?
Well, that sounds like a great way to have started this podcast an hour and a half ago.
That would require us to be diligent to our show notes.
Well, and to have paid attention to what we're doing. No, I gave this considerable thought, and I realised the superpower that I want is that every politician within 100 metres of me, every time they tell a lie, will break into interpretive dance.
So you just, with the power of your will, can make them do that?
I want that superpower to apply to me for the day of the first debate between Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton, and I want to be seated in the front row.
That's very specific.
With a big bag of popcorn, watching them basically spend 2 hours in interpretive dance because all they do is lie. And no one else knows why. And they can't stop themselves, and they can't stop themselves from talking and lying. And I get to sit in the front row as the only person in the world who understands what the hell is going on right now. That's the superpower I would like.
So you just want that superpower for a day, or?
Well, that was the question, was if you could have a superpower for a day, what would it be and why? Well, that's what it would be, and that's why.
Do you know what mine would be?
What would yours be?
This is kind of based on the Greek mythology that I was reading about. So Narcissus and Echo. Mm-hmm. For those who aren't familiar, that's where the word narcissism comes from and the word echo comes from. And go Google it. I'm not going to tell the story now. But I thought it was really interesting how, who was the god? Nemesis. It's all these words. So Nemesis is the god of revenge.
Yes.
Funny that.
Yes, he's my nemesis.
And the god of revenge hears the cries of Echo, who dies from unrequited love because of Narcissus, and punishes Narcissus by making him enamored with his own reflection, and he dies of thirst because he doesn't want to disrupt the pond reflection, right?
Yeah.
My superpower would be to effectively hold a mirror to the person that is entranced by bullshit ideology that they've been indoctrinated on the internet.
You said my one was specific.
What I mean for this is that I honestly do believe deep down in their heart of hearts there is that cognitive dissonance, right? Like where you know that what you're saying, there's some level of bullshit, but you don't want to reconcile with it because that would require you to break away from the herd, and then you don't get to be like part of the pack and all the things, right? That mirror would make you sort of face your bullshit, and where, you're required to either look at your own hypocrisy, and look, we all are hypocritical to a degree, But what it means by that is it's like, okay, so you're espousing these values, but now that I've held the mirror up to you, we can see how much of a hypocrite you are.
Yeah.
Now you have to reconcile with that.
Yeah.
And I would do that to politicians.
Mm-hmm.
I would do that to people who pontificate on social media about how virtuous they are. And I think it would just cut out a lot of the trash.
Can I make a sideways reference here that absolutely nobody but me is going to get? Did you ever watch Murder, She Wrote?
Yeah, with the chick from Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Angela Lansbury, show some respect, the username, thank you very much.
Do you remember that movie? That was one of my favourite Disney movies.
I remember seeing it, and it actually scared me the first time I saw it.
Yeah, it was, God, that would have been the 60s, 70s?
I don't know.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Like, she used to put the bed knob on the end of the foot of it, and then the bed would fly through
So Angela Lansbury is the most dangerous person to meet because every week someone very close to her gets murdered, and it's almost always somebody that she's just met with in the last few days.
Sounds like Hillary Clinton.
It's very rarely, actually, we need to talk about that actually. Anyway, so the reason I bring that up is because if you had that superpower, I would immediately go and become an undertaker and just follow you around. Because after having that mirror put in their faces, there would be an awful lot of people dying suddenly.
Yes.
And I would make a lot of money as an undertaker.
With that, I think there's a level, like, you know, I'm not pretending to be anything I'm not. I am a flawed human like the rest of us. What I can't stand is when people like to think that they're exclusive to the laws of nature. Oh, I don't do that. You fucking do.
We all do. And you make a good point, though, because I argue all the time that certain laws shouldn't exist. And people say, oh, you think you're special. You think you should be above the law. No. I think no one should be held to that law.
Yeah.
I think the law itself is bad. I don't want a special rule for me or a change that applies to me. I want a change that applies to everybody because that law simply shouldn't exist. The laws of physics, they don't care who you are.
Bibbity boppity boo. What you say you mean, and you mean what you say. That's my superpower. So mean what you say and say what you mean. So you're not giving away all these like false friggin' ideological statements that mean nothing. You have to mean what you say.
We speaking of meaning what we say, we did say that after the battery change, we're only going to go for another 20 minutes, and we already have. So
it says 1 hour and 54 minutes.
What else do we have?
Okay, so we've got a couple. Just on that, people saying things that they don't mean. Harry Sisson, I've talked about him before. He was caught up in a scandal. He's one of the young Democrat influencers.
Oh, yeah.
22 or 23-year-old. Anyway, it's come out. He's a bit of a Chad, bit of a ladies' man. Everyone speculated that he was gay, and anyway, he's apparently got like 11 different women. Oh. And of course, in true Democrat fashion, he's come out blaming MAGA.
Oh, of course.
For his own mistakes. But he has been fired from his influencer agency, and someone put out a spreadsheet of all the money that is being channeled from the DNC into influencers. And it's extraordinary. We're not talking like $100, guys. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per person.
That is happening on that same side of politics in Australia as well.
Yeah.
I'm quite convinced of it.
Which is what I wanted to talk about.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to talk about a guy named Punter's Politics.
Oh, yes, good old Punter.
Who will present himself a bit like Friendly Jordan. Geordies, just like
Jordan
this,
Shanks.
Altruistic, I did this out of the good of my heart, and yet somehow have managed to amass this ginormous following seemingly overnight and have budget to take out billboards that I say was funded by the people. But what you don't know is that through secondary and third party, like little shelter campaigns that's coming to me from other billionaires.
I don't have proof of anything specific.
But we are conspiracy theorists, and we tend to be accurate.
I've been in this game for 16 years. I've been offered money numerous times. I know the kinds of conversations that go on.
Yeah.
Because I've been in them. I've said no. Other people don't. I have to believe one of two things, that these young gentlemen magically figured out the formula and exploded from zero to hero in no time flat, entirely bootstrapped against all odds, succeeding where everyone else fails.
One of those abnormalities.
Or that there was budget there to help them
Well, it brings me back to literally what we talked about in this podcast, the amount of effort that goes into doing this. Now, I've said to you guys, I'm not a perfectionist, but I like to do things well. I wish I could spend a week researching this so I could come to the table and go, here's all the facts, here's all this. I don't have the manpower. I'm one person, and these guys seem to have insane amounts of inside information and are collating copious amounts of data to be then able to turn into like a skit they do for social media. And sure, they get you in because they do it with like the TikTok green screen and they're like, oh, look how like lowbrow it is. Like, you know, it's underdeveloped production.
Yeah. So there's a very, very funny saying. Once you learn how to fake authenticity, you've got it made. And authenticity is the currency now that has the greatest value. You have, you know, and this is why, for example, Russell Brand doesn't show you on a routine basis the dozen people that he's got.
Yeah.
It just looks like he's just there. It's just you and me, and this is where I do my meditations, man. You know. But the truth is there's a production and there's a business around all of that. Now, I don't know the scale of the operation of Jordan Shanks or of what's his face, the other one that you mentioned.
I think his name's Conrad, but it's Punters Politics.
I don't know. I don't know their stories, and I'd be very happy to hear them. But as I look at that, I don't see self-made bootstrapped. It looks to me as though there has been money there that has helped them to solve problems quickly that normally have to be solved slowly because it takes time to build momentum.
And I know that because we're literally doing it.
Well, I've been doing it for 16 years. You know, the old saying, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. Well, I must be a bit dumb because it's taken me 16. But I got offered $1 million by Dick Smith. I've told you that story. Yeah. And Dick Smith comes to me, says, hey, Topher, love your work. This is, I think, 2012. I was 30. Being offered $1 million. And $1 million was worth double back then what it is now. Right? $1 million was a substantial amount of money. I was homeless at the time, actually. I was staying at a friend's couch. And he comes along and says, hey, love your work. You're an amazing communicator. I have this thing called the Wilberforce Award. It's $1 million towards someone under 30 years of age who is willing to be the face of my campaign against a big Australia.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I think you're wrong about the dangers of a big Australia. I've read your book. I've watched your documentary. I think you're wrong. But if there's $1 million on the line, I'll have a chat. So he flew me up to Sydney. We spent a day together. It was a fun day. We flew in a helicopter over the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Like, just one of those stories that I tell and people just don't believe that it actually happened. And he spent the whole day basically trying to convince me to take $1 million off him.
Yeah.
And I spent the entire day arguing back and pointing out the holes in his reasoning and in his argument. And in the end, he gave up. And he just went, okay, because I wasn't willing to be the face of something I didn't truly believe in.
Yeah.
But that's not the only time I've been offered money. There are lots of people out there, even 10 years ago when my following was a fraction of what it is, the minute there's a bit of a following there, all of a sudden the checkbook comes out.
Yeah.
And I've said no every single time, apart from when I've crowdfunded for, you know, documentaries and things like that. But I have to believe, based on the evidence that I'm seeing, it appears to me that others have not said no.
Yeah. I have a similar experience. I mean, I haven't always done what you've done, but I'm really good at ideation. I am an innovator in the sense that I tend to recognize the trend before the trend even gets started.
Sure.
That's not an early adopter. It's the one before. It's the innovator or the disruptor.
Yeah.
And I've done that so many times. I joined Instagram before it even became Instagram. I was on Spotify when Spotify still had under 10,000 universe.
I was on the internet back when we had to do it by carrier pigeon, but, you know, you do you.
The point is, it's an interest for me. I hear something, I jump on, and the problem with being too early is you're too early, and it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the way we've been talking about COVID, and you say this all the time. It doesn't pay to be right early.
It sucks to be right early, but that's the only time it matters.
Yeah, right. So the reason I say that is, like, I have noticed that that's the skill of mine that people seem to see dollar signs. And I have, unfortunately, in my early years, because of my naivety and being too green about business, I have been, had business partners and things like that where I was taken advantage of because I didn't realize. Yeah. And they see dollar signs and they want to get in quick because they're like, hang on a minute, this is a good idea. I had a business partner, oh God, when would this be? Like 2012, somewhere around there. And I was already growing my clothing company. And, when I say growing, CrossFit was this big and I was making good money and it was, it was a little business, but for what it was in the market it was doing really well.
Yeah.
And this person, I can only describe them as a vulture, somehow beguiled me and this was my first taste of meeting an actual narcissist.
Yeah, right.
Like a proper, super charismatic, walk the talk, beguiles you, and then you go, oh,
Just
wow, that sounds great. And I was young, man. I was like 25. I was a baby. And I fell for it and then realised that person was stealing my IP, stealing my manufacturer, and then trying to sabotage me. And then it all came out and it was like, and I've had trouble with this person in days since. But when you see that, you kind of go, shit, like wisen up quick. And I've had that now. I even just doing this podcast and my YouTube, the amount of people going, hey, do you want to have a chat? Hey, I want to be part of this. Hey, I want to get on early. And I'm like, this time around, nah.
Yeah. This is one of the silver linings for me. I sound really funny. Do I sound funny in your headset?
You've got to talk closer to the microphone.
I mean, I can do that.
Yes.
But I'm afraid that people will just, I don't know, they'll leave a wet patch on their seat.
You got to talk, I think, about like a fist.
Well, sure, but that's where I was. But it just has this really odd, I don't know, we'll listen back to it later. Maybe I'm imagining things.
If there's one more problem with this audio.
Well, see, the thing is, I think it sounds different to what it did. This is the thing. I think it sounded better than this earlier. It's like there's a weird, it's not an echo. Anyway, it's like I'm in a tin shed. That's what it sounds like to me.
I think you need to talk into it more.
Am I not?
That's
better. Am I not? Literally, are you not entertained?
If you're over here, it doesn't sound good. You got to be here.
Right. Well, I will just swallow the microphone then. What was I about to say? Can you read my mind and tell me the thing that I've forgotten?
We were talking about people taking advantage, taking money, people having agendas and getting on board early.
Goodness.
We're talking about punters politics.
Yeah, sucks to be right early, but that's the only time it matters. Anyway, the point being, all it glitters is not gold. There is a lot of money being revealed in the US. We can say with certainty that in the US, an enormous number of the people who appeared to be self-made, bootstrapped, friendly local influencers on the left-wing side of politics are actually paid political operatives, part of very high budget, very sophisticated psyops. I believe the same thing to be happening on a smaller scale here in Australia. So just beware.
Look, I'm all for people making a living off what they do, and I think that's great, but don't falsely represent yourself.
Correct.
And this is the thing, like when I see punters politics, it is very evident that he is pushing the Teal agenda. It is extraordinarily obvious.
He certainly is one of the few, to be honest. The Teals are on the nose almost everywhere, but he certainly seems to like them.
And this is the thing. This is just like, I guess I'm like skeptic now. Like I'm very skeptical of a lot of things. And I like to see people do well. And as I've said before, like if you disagree with me, great. Let's put it all on the table and then we can actually chat. But don't do it clandestinely. Don't try to be all subtle about it because you're not subtle. You're about as subtle as a sledgehammer. And, he always platforms Zoe Daniels and Monique Ryan. Like anyway, I believe he's a Teal shill and he gets really like annoyed when people call him that too. But as someone who's worked in this industry and I know how much budget is required to do these things, you are not doing that just based on T-shirt sales and a GoFundMe.
Moving on before we get ourselves sued.
Allegedly.
Yeah, because we can't afford to get sued because we don't have money behind us.
But hey, what can we...
But if you'd like to change that, I have a back pocket you'd be welcome to stuff a brown paper bag in.
Just on that, let's put it out to you guys because we are putting together a pitch deck. We are taking this bigger. We're creating an Oddcast channel.
We're on episode 12.
We put the sign back.
We put that was you guys. You guys had a big old hissy fit when the sign wasn't there last episode, so it's back.
And
you
we've
can quit
mounted
your
it on the
whinging.
wall.
Quit your belly aching, all right?
But he was attached to it, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that people like consistency.
It is nice, but I'm still gonna whinge about you.
But on that, this is something that we're gonna do. We're gonna start an Oddcast YouTube channel.
Yep.
We are on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. Please make sure you tell people about it. Yep. But what would you guys be happy with us advertising? Because that's the thing.
Well, see, this is the thing. You don't drink at all. I'm not drinking at the moment, so it'd be a bit disingenuous to have here whiskey, Topher whiskey, the Oddcast.
Oh no,
schnapps.
no! I can advertise alcohol very easily. Okay. If your packaging is pretty, I'll be like, buy it because it's pretty.
Because it's pretty.
Yeah, I'm.
So can I advertise somebody else's alcohol right now?
Yeah.
The greatest ad that I've seen in a very long time is the Ricky Gervais. Is it a whiskey? I think it is. And it says, buying this whiskey will make a man rich and happy. And that man is Ricky Gervais.
Yeah.
It's just brilliantly, brilliantly clever. So yes, if we could get some advertisers, that'd be great. But yeah, what?
Suggest
Who
them.
do you know? Do you know people?
Do you know people who know people who know people? Yeah. But I guess, I don't know, should we do some rapid fire and round this podcast out?
There's one last story. I'm sorry.
Please go.
I'm sorry to bring this up, but there has now been a fish held up inside Parliament House.
Is the name Sarah Hanson-Young, the Greens? Yeah.
And this is to do with fishing licenses and a big debate around sustainability and everything else. And look, I love a good political stunt as much as anybody else, but that's a really big fish to have transported in to Parliament House. And
it would stink.
I'm so sorry in advance, but I saw the pictures and my head went places that it just should not have gone. And
Don't do it.
I'm just thinking, is that a fish in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?
I can't find it.
Can't even find your button. You're trying to find your button.
I was so...
Look, I'm sorry, but that's like, oh no, that's going to take a week to get that smell out of that room.
Do you know what though? This just brings me to one more conversation we should probably have, is just how scraping the barrel the left are with their props and ideas and ways to get their points across. You know, like last week it was all about burning Teslas.
That's certainly a load of nonsense. I don't mind a good political stunt. Communications is what I do, and yeah, getting people's attention is hard. In the eyeball economy, everyone wants the eyeballs. It can be hard to get it. Things like, I really appreciated the libertarian stunt where they subsidised people's fuel, so they weren't paying for the tax, and they get all the media around that. That feels a lot more substantive to me. It doesn't feel like a desperate plea for attention. They really are making a point, as opposed to walking into Parliament with a big ass salmon. I just
find it's clickbaity, right? It's about attention. She gets a clip for Instagram and then gets a whole bunch of comments. It's not long-term solutions. And do you know where I'm frustrated? And I've made this point before, but I'll drive it home. Where are the adults? Because, like, I get it. I get what you're doing. It's a social media economy, attention, engagement, all that sort of stuff. But I find it so tedious. I'm so uninterested. Can we get to the adults in the room having a discussion? And we can disagree. As adults, we can disagree. But at least let's have enough respect for each other to be able to have a conversation where you're not screeching at me, bringing a fish into Parliament or carrying on. Let's just talk like humans.
Can I say something that really will get me cancelled?
Oh, God.
What you're asking for is a return of true masculinity. Because men have a greater capacity to solve problems regardless of whether they like it or not. They can recognise what's best. Women being more maternal, more protective in that way, I think are more driven by what's going to be the thing that looks after me and my family. I don't want my kids to suffer in any way. I don't want anything bad to happen to them. They're driven by that more maternal instinct. This is why statistically, when we have a lot of data on this, women support socialism. Women support safety nets, high taxing type societies. Men support a reward for effort.
Yeah.
Take a risk, the reward is yours. And what we actually need, in my opinion, is a return of much more genuine masculinity into our politics. And I, for those that think I'm going all Andrew Tate, I define masculinity very, very simply. It is strength in service. Strength by itself is not masculinity. It is strength when someone harnesses it and disciplines themselves to use their strength. They could use it for themselves. They could use it for their own power, for their own lusts, for their own whatever, but they choose instead to place that strength in service to others. That is masculinity at work. And that is what I think we are lacking in politics. People are too much finger to the wind, spineless. They don't have the strength, and they're all about themselves and their career, so they're not in service. There is no masculinity even amongst the men in politics.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I think I would describe it a different way.
Sure.
And it's that whole Jordan Peterson, it's better to be a warrior in a garden, right? I think too few people are going into war as gardeners than people who are warriors who are tending to their garden. And what I mean by that is people are so quick to pick up arms and to be outraged and to be driven by their emotions, and that's what it is. Every political discourse right now is about how I feel, not about what we need.
Yep.
And, it's very much centered around the individual. We need to get to a point where you can go to war. And I don't mean like the actual war. I mean metaphysically war.
Metaphorically, yeah.
Metaphorically war. We need to be built up as warriors so that we can go to war, but we choose not to. And I don't think anyone is in that. Not anyone, but I think few people are in that position.
We've created a culture where someone who is wired that way is never going to rise to the top of any of our major political parties.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
Yeah, I would agree. So,
all right. Let's rapid fire. Yep.
Okay, let's go to trending topics. Dutton's fuel excise cut versus Labor's tax policy.
Okay, yes. Let's cover this quickly. Okay, so what we've got here in the budget, Labor announced a slight fiddle to the value of the lowest tax bracket from 16% down to 15%, and then the following financial year to be down again to 14%. It saves people about $5 a week.
Yeah.
Right? Which is
not even a cup of coffee.
Well, it's meaningless in the context that our cost of living is going to go up by a lot more than that. Bracket creep, if you watch my video on bracket creep, is going to increase people's taxes by a lot more than that. Now, in reply, Dutton has said, well, actually, we're going to take 25 cents per litre off the fuel excise for people with cars. Now, that will actually have a much bigger positive effect on most people because once you use about 20 litres in a week, you'll be ahead. You will have saved more than $5. However, this is an opportunity to talk about tax cuts and why some are better than others. Let's assume that they both add up to $5 a week, right? So the actual saving is $5 a week. One tax cut, the reduction in income tax, means that you've got more dollars in your pocket, which means you've got more dollar amounts to spend on things. The other one reduces the cost of energy, the cost of petrol, which saves you dollars in your pocket, but it actually has the effect also of reducing the price of everything on the shelf because energy and fuel is an input cost into every single link in the supply chain. So what you've got is a great example here of one tax cut that would be inflationary, i.e. it leaves more dollars in your pocket and you spend more, increases economic activity, has a tendency to push, so there's more dollars chasing the same amount of goods, pushes inflation up. The other one, reducing tax on fuel and the effect that would then have on the supply chain is actually deflationary. It will have the effect of actually causing shelf prices to begin to ease, or at least some of the pressure to begin to ease on shelf prices. So when we talk about tax cuts, even if they were the same dollar figure, the Liberal Party's idea is a better economic idea because it doesn't drive inflation the way that the Labor government's does. But both of them are so minor and are fiddling at the edges of a massive problem that in the grand scheme of things, they're meaningless.
Okay. Yep. All right, this is meant to be rapid fire.
Sorry.
This is an American one. DHS Secretary Christy Nome is in El Salvador, my favorite country, at the CCOT Center, saying that if you're an illegal immigrant and you commit terrorism in the States, that's where you're going to end up.
So why? So she's the education secretary.
It says, well, this is what Twitter says. She is Secretary Nome, warns of deportation to El Salvador prison, DHS.
Sorry, Department of Human Services. Sorry, yes. So that does make sense.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, yeah.
Okay, so that's that.
You would have loved reading that.
I told you, Naya Boucle and I, we're going to have a chat.
Yep.
Melbourne Comedy Festival show halted after audience member death.
I didn't look into this. Apparently someone passed away of natural causes, some kind of a medical emergency. Obviously, condolences to friends and family. There are an enormous amount of punchlines available there about how bad the comedy must have been, but I'm going to leave all of those jokes alone.
Yeah, that's probably not one.
Yeah.
Wildfires and God, it's so depressing reading X sometimes. Where else? What do we got? Same really. It's the same debates. All right, let's just do a quick rapid scrolly here. Stuff about AFL. Have you ever heard of AFL?
Couldn't care less.
Yeah, me neither. I used to be very into it.
I picked a team for the first time in the year 1990. I remember it well. I was in primary school. I was told that it was un-Australian not to have an AFL team. My best friend went for Collingwood. Don't judge me. I didn't have good judgment as a child. And so I said, fine, I go for Collingwood. That year they won. After they won, all the Collingwood supporters, and I was lumped in with that group, got the crap beat out of us in the schoolyard by the grade sixes. Mm-hmm. And I decided, well, if this is what AFL is all about, then I don't really want to be part of it. So I haven't had a team since.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. One thing that's bothering me is I'm just looking at this tweet about, or not tweet, what do you call it? Post around AOC. And they're basically making fun of her that she's put on weight. I find this
Who cares?
so reductive. I just hate those ad hominem attacks.
And honestly, can we, like, there are so many good reasons to criticize AOC. Her economics is ignorant. Her politics is vacuous. There are so many valid reasons to criticize her. Can we not just make it about a couple of kilos or a couple of pounds worth of whatever?
And I don't think people realize how much that reduces the credibility of your argument as well. When you
the
resort
minute
to those,
you go there, always assume that someone is using the best argument they've got.
Yeah.
And always assume that the other person thinks you're using the best argument you've got.
Yeah.
So if you lead with, but she got fat, well, that's the best argument you've got. And you've just admitted that because that's the argument that you led with.
Yeah. Jasmine Crockett has done a Nazi salute. I'll show you the photos.
I see.
Yeah. Oh, yep. Actually, let's talk about that really quickly. So speaking of ad hominem attacks, because the right does it and the left do it.
Correct.
Jasmine Crockett, she's the she's the Democrat leader at the moment, isn't she?
I actually don't know.
She called Governor Abbott, who's the governor of Texas, Hot Wheels. And she says it's in reference to his policies, not the fact that he's in a wheelchair. And that's now the debate. And I'm sitting here going, our politicians, not our politicians, we're not American citizens, but like that's where politics is at now. That's what we're talking about. Come on, guys, grow up.
This isn't new, though. If you go back to some of the earlier presidential campaigns in the US, they were vicious. They were, the stuff that the candidates were saying about each other was like, even by modern standards, you just go, whoa, like, come on, man, that's a bit much. You go back to when the AC electricity versus DC electricity debate was going on before the sort of the standards of alternating current had been devised. The proponents of different types of electricity were running around electrocuting dogs and calling each other murderers and saying they wanted to kill babies and all kinds of stuff. I mean, this isn't new. The infantilizing is a concern. I would say that we've lost a lot of intellectual capacity since those days. But the actual, this kind of overhyping and over-dramatizing is unfortunately not new, and it's just something we've just got to accept. This is part of how politics works.
Yeah, okay. Next one, SCOTUS in America has upheld Biden's ruling about ghost guns requiring background checks. Do you know anything about this?
Look, I'm not keeping up with that, no.
Okay.
That whole situation. I mean, to me, you got to rescind the national firearms, the NFA, which then made it illegal to have suppressors without, and got rid of machine guns. Like, do I want everyone to have machine guns? Yes, actually, I do. I do. Yep.
Last one, Snow White.
Yes, so I covered this. I did a video on this. Look, honestly, Snow White put itself in a really funny position where everyone's boycotting it for different reasons. So a whole bunch of conservatives were apparently boycotting it because Snow White actually was snow brown. And no one's got a problem with the fact that there's a brown Disney princess. We loved Aladdin with Jasmine. We loved Pocahontas. We loved Mulan.
Yeah.
People flocked to see, white men took their kids to go and see a coloured Disney princess. That's not the issue. The issue is the character is Snow White. It's described a certain way.
Yeah.
And so you honour that if you're making a movie of it. But then the left boycotted it because Gal Gadot was also in there, and she's Israeli, and they have this whole hate thing going on there. So it was a movie that really spectacularly managed to put everyone offside, and the box office results reflect that. Also, it's just a bad movie.
Yeah, I don't care about the ad hominem attacks. Couldn't care less that she has back hair. I saw that post. Oh, she's got back hair. Great.
Who cares?
Couldn't care less that she's Hispanic. Couldn't care less. She's got a great set of pipes on her. The girl can sing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, really good singer.
Yeah.
What my issue is like, just tell us a goddamn story without the politics.
Yeah.
Give us a Disney movie. It used to be escapism.
They are getting slammed for just being a bad movie.
Yeah. Just make a good movie. Like Disney up until like early 2000s was
synonymous.
Magical.
Yeah. Well, this is why DreamWorks was so significant when they came out, because they were kind of the first non-Disney animated film company to actually prove that they could do it too.
Yeah.
Disney were the benchmark, and now it's all just been downhill since then.
So the story around Snow White, I'm just like, let's just talk about the fact that it's been a long time since Hollywood has put out good movies.
So Disney have not had nothing but failures. Their remake of Aladdin, the live action Aladdin, actually did well, took in $1 billion around the world. And again, brown Disney princess. People don't have a problem with it.
Is that when Will Smith was the genie?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and actually did well in box offices. And I didn't see that coming because honestly, no matter who you cast as the genie, trying to follow on from Robin Williams, that's a poison chalice. But apparently he must have done okay because the film did well.
I can be honest, I don't think I've watched any of the live action remakes.
I haven't.
Like, I know they did The Lion King. Leave it alone.
I bought a complete box set of Disney films on DVD so they wouldn't be able to keep changing them. And then discovered that they have little content warnings on the front saying this was made in a time past when things were... And there's a few missing. There's a few of the early Disney films that they've strategically just left out of this complete collection because they weren't politically correct enough.
God,
But I got them on DVD because I thought if I trust the streaming services, they're all just going to get altered and edited. And, I don't remember specifically.
Yeah, Fantasia is one of their... Like, I watched it a couple months ago on Disney Plus, and there was all the warnings. And
Yeah.
So just on that, are you a James Bond fan?
I've watched most of the James Bond movies over the years,
I think Daniel Craig was a brilliant Bond.
Daniel Craig in Casino Royale was peak Bond.
Yeah, I think they were fantastic.
Bond.
And quite dark, and I liked it. But so the family that owned the rights to it, the Broccoli family, I think they are, they've finally just given up having any sort of creative input because Amazon bought out MGM. MGM owned the rights to Bond.
Yep.
And now, like Marvel before it and all other good franchises, they're going to bastardize it and have all these
Rings
spin-offs.
of Power, I'm still annoyed about that.
Oh, no one's gotten over that.
Yeah.
And so that's essentially what we have to look forward to.
Okay. So I lost interest in Daniel Craig as Bond at the end of Casino Royale because Casino Royale is kind of a prequel. It's Bond before he's become a 00. And so we watch him, he gets his 2 kills, he goes through this whole process and we discover that he doesn't yet have his martini shaken, not stirred. He just has a martini and then gets asked, shaken, and he has to decide. And so what we're being introduced to this world where Bond hasn't become Bond yet. And I loved there was a rawness to him and there wasn't that same veneer. See, Bond seems like he doesn't care, but it's a facade that he puts on. It's the persona that he wears to hide all of what's underneath. When at the end of Casino Royale, and if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, but if you haven't seen it by now, honestly, when the love interest dies, because that was a true love interest. That wasn't a disposable Bond chick. That was a true love interest. And when she dies, we had the opportunity to watch that veil come down over the character, but that never happened. And Daniel Craig continued to be that same pre-00 person. He never became the post-00. And Pierce Brosnan, as much as I did not like him in many respects, he had that slickness to him, that cavalier disregard. And I just wanted to see that switch get flicked inside Daniel Craig's mind, and that would have just been perfection. Yeah. Never happened. I have watched the subsequent Daniel Craig ones, and he does a good job, but he's not Bond in that. Yeah. In that truest sense, he's not Bond.
Yeah, I just miss good movies. I used to be one of those people that go to the movies once a week.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I actually don't remember the last time I went to the cinemas. It probably would have been to see Oppenheimer or something.
Oppenheimer was amazing.
Brilliant.
Bent my brain.
Christopher Nolan never stuffs up.
But I just went and watched, what's the one about the new Pope being selected?
Covenant? No, Conclave.
Conclave, thank you. Visually spectacular. Yeah. You will love watching just from a cinematographic point of view. The structure, the design, I mean, it's incredibly simple. The whole thing happens in a courtyard and a couple of rooms. It's very, very simple. Obviously, very elaborate wardrobe, but that's true to what actually happens in real life. And obviously, the buildings that they're in are quite pretty, but the construction of how they have shot is really, really beautiful. It's really pretty. I did gold class. Thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah. It had a little bit of woke nonsense in it, but less than most. Yeah. So, I could tolerate that.
Yeah. See, like, why didn't they learn from Top Gun Maverick?
Oh, that was fun. Trash,
Billions.
but fun.
No, but it was exactly what we wanted.
Yeah,
it's exactly how I expected the Top Gun sequel to go.
Escapism. Yeah. That's the word you used earlier. That's exactly what they offered.
There was nothing in that I would have changed. I thought it was spectacular. Yep. It gave you a good homage to the original. Yep. And there was key moments there that you made you feel like, yes, like...
I will say, when he jumps in his jet and does the unauthorized takeoff and he rips his way into that canyon to prove that they can get through in the time allowed, I involuntarily was leaning forward on my seat. Like it had me. It absolutely had me all the way through that sequence.
Yeah, because if anyone was going to do that, it's going to be Maverick. You know?
It's just, but some movies, they set you up. They set up the main character to have this thing that they have to do, and you just sit there and realize as you're watching, I don't care. But that had me.
Do you know what I liked about Top Gun? And I think this is what I like about a lot of movies is even though he's the hero, he's the anti-hero in many respects because he's incredibly disliked.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's that scene in Maverick where he says the admiral comes in and goes, you could be a two-star admiral by now and you're still a
whatever he was,
captain or whatever. Yeah. And I was like, that's the perfect that's the perfect hero of a movie, someone that, you know.
And I liked the fact that he was at fault in the relationships and things like that. Like there was a matureness to it. He wasn't still the same hothead that he was.
Yeah.
He was now at 15 years later, hothead suffering the consequences of having been that hothead. There was a lot that they nearly lost me at the start. The idea that he could take off in the Dark Star, push it past Mach 10, again, spoilers, push it past Mach 10, have some sort of a failure that results in a total catastrophic loss of the aircraft and he's not dead. You are not ejecting and staying alive above about 400 knots. I think even that's pretty touch and go. 10,000 kilometers an hour plus, you are not coming out of that alive. There is no mechanism known to man by which you then walk into a lonely bar in the middle of the desert somewhere and look around with a beaten up flight suit and go, oh, anybody got a phone? That doesn't happen. So that really, like, they could have just tweaked that sequence a little bit to give us more of a context for how the hell did he survive that?
Yeah.
That nearly lost me. That nearly lost me. I was just like, no, sorry, too far. But I'm glad I stayed with it because it was a good movie.
Speaking of losing people, we're probably going to lose our listeners, so we should check out.
I hope you've enjoyed your nap.
Thank you for indulging us. But they do like our side chats.
Well, apparently, yes.
Yeah, that seems to be the most remarkable part of this podcast.
Yes, so we could probably just sit down having made no plans whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't tell the difference.
But on that, guys, we are on Spotify.
Yes.
We are on Apple Podcasts.
Yes.
And we are seeing more and more downloads on Spotify each week, which is great.
Amazing.
But what we need from you guys, other than financial support, is just to share it. Tell people about it. Put it on your social media. Tell your friends because word of mouth is far more important than anything. And follow us on the platforms.
Just open up 1,000 different incognito windows on your computer and download it 1,000 times, and that'd just be great. That'd just help our numbers. Yeah,
because we need the numbers to prove to people that we can get circulation. Anyway,
that's it. That
all being said, at Topher at Carlz J Soda, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Brilliant.
Done. I'm going to be very interested to listen back to this because this sounds fine, but there's something weird. You hear that?
Yeah.
That's not the same as yours.
Because it's going in here, not here. It's got to go in the front.
But I feel like it's on.
Go closer to it.
Well, sure, but I mean, I can't just be. It's not an ice cream.
No, but if it's.
I feel like a Formula One broadcaster at this point in time. I'm just literally swallowing the microphone. I mean, I can do the radio voice thing if you want, but that's
it could be also noise gate. So we were playing around with that.
Yeah. So your threshold, your floor is too high. It's cutting in and out too much.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.